Chapter 596. Defeats Qiao Yuyu. A scary energy surged out from the demon-inscribed tablet. A majestic and sacred power had swept out in a flash. Audacious! A cold shout emitted from the demon-inscribed tablet. Yi Shiwen responded almost immediately. It's Mu Xingjie. He quickly realized that this demon-inscribed tablet was Mu Xingjie's divine tool. It had been lent to Qiao Yuyu. However, it still belonged to Mu Xingjie in the end. Therefore, this divine tool contained Mu Xingjie's wisp of soul inside it. That wisp of soul usually remained in deep sleep. However, it had awakened when a tyrannical person like Yi Shiwen had tried to seize the demon-inscribed tablet. Everyone's eyes became wide open as they saw this scene. They secretly held their breath. Is Yi Ziwen's tyrant body technique so much powerful? His sage-level body doesn't disintegrate under the demon-inscribed tablet. Many people had thoroughly researched about Yi Ziwen's tyrant body technique when he had abruptly risen to fame. Everyone knew that his tyrant body technique was very powerful. However, it was useless for them. A lot of people had secretly obtained the tyrant body technique. However, they had been left dumbstruck when they had seen that there was only one layer intact. One could cultivate at most in the Hotian realm with one layer. Therefore, it was of little value for these people. These people had further verified the news that they had obtained from the all-knowing scholar. They had then arrived at the conclusion that Yi Shiwen had himself deduced the further layers of the tyrant body technique by relying upon his own capability. Therefore, these people couldn't do anything about their incapability even though they envied and hated Yi Shiwen. These people could only look at Yi Ziwen's tyrant body technique in helplessness. But they couldn't do anything. They had only seen the first layer which could be cultivated in the Hotian realm. However, they could tell that the tyrant body technique was a very high-level technique. It was claimed that the practitioner could even tear apart the devils and gods with bare hands after they reached the highest layer. Perhaps, this wasn't just an exaggerated statement. In fact, they couldn't even say that they could deduce all layers of an ordinary power technique with ease. They would have a hard time doing so even if it were just an imitation. Therefore, they were completely helpless when faced with the tyrant body technique. After all, the tyrant body technique was incredible. It was far beyond their expectations. However, it was still facing a great sage tool. They couldn't imagine that a sage expert could grab a great sage tool with their bare hands even if it was an incomplete one. Several sage experts had come and gone. However, Yi Shiwen might be the only one who had managed to pull off something like this. Blood was unceasingly gushing out from Yi Ziwen's hand. However, his hand hadn't disintegrated. This was already a miracle. I would have given you some value if your main form had been present in front of me. However, it's only a wisp of your soul, that's all. So I'll just suppress it. Yi Shiwen scoffed as a seemingly endless golden light suddenly emitted from his bloody hand. His divinity surged out and suppressed the demon-inscribed tablet. How dare you? Qiao Yuyu was startled by this development. Then he became angry. He hadn't expected that Yi Shiwen would dare to attack the demon-inscribed tablet. Mu Xingjie was like a god to him. So this act of Yi Ziwen's was like profanity in his eyes. Qiao Yuyu had never suffered a loss since his debut. He had never fallen into a disadvantageous position while facing his peers. However, he had repeatedly suffered losses at the hands of Yi Shiwen. Moreover, Yi Shiwen could be regarded as his junior. He could have somehow come to terms with this. However, Yi Shiwen had also dared to attack the divine tool of his senior brother Mu, a man who was a godlike figure for him. Yi Shiwen had gone too far in Qiao Yuyu's opinion. A real elemental energy broke out from Qiao Yuyu's body amidst a roaring sound. And it seemed as if the meridians on his face would explode. I want you dead. Qiao Yuyu went crazy. A big hand stretched out, and suddenly issued a world-shaking imposing aura. Then his body flashed intensely. This made him look like a white lightning. The inexhaustible real elemental energy on his skin issued strange ripples, which made him look like a crazy dragon. Qiao Yuyu looked at Yi Shiwen with an exceptionally vicious expression in his eyes. He then assembled all kinds of magical powers and martial techniques, and threw them towards Yi Shiwen all at once. Yi Shiwen had also become angry. He didn't loathe Qiao Yuyu like earlier. However, That didn't mean that he would let Qiao Yuyu act presumptuously in front of him. Yi Shiwen raised his hand. Countless golden lights emitted from his hand and interweaved to form a huge net. Qiao Yuyu's speed was very quick. However, Yi Ziwen's interweaved network was even quicker. It had shrouded Qiao Yuyu in an instant. Rumble. A violent explosion occurred when the net bumped into Qiao Yuyu's body. It seemed as if Qiao Yuyu had stepped on a landmine. Poof! Blood splashed out from Qiao Yuyu's body, and his body shivered violently. His body had been ruptured to some extent, and it seemed as if it would disintegrate in the next moment. Qiao Yuyu spared no effort to stabilize his soul, in order to prevent his body from collapsing. It's needless to say that the body is extremely important for an expert. In fact, the body is the foundation of practicing martial arts. One doesn't have anything if one doesn't have a body. Therefore, Qiao Yuyu couldn't let his body collapse. He would suffer heavy losses if his body collapsed. Even if his spirit survived. After all, his vitality would get severely damaged if this happened. However, it didn't matter how much he resisted. Yi Ziwen's martial power was much more tyrannical than his. Qiao Yuyu had finally understood that Yi Shiwen couldn't be measured on the basis of realm. He was a monster. Poof! Qiao Yuyu's soul also sustained serious injuries. Finally, he couldn't help but spout a mouthful of blood. However, it wasn't ordinary blood. Instead, it was his blood essence which contained his vitality. He had failed to keep it suppressed, and had ended up spouting a mouthful of it. His cultivation had reduced by 1/3 after he spouted just a mouthful of blood. Yi Shiwen was thinking of attacking further. However, the demon-inscribed tablet in his hand emitted even more dreadful rays of light than before. Then, a wisp of soul suddenly emerged out from inside it. Yi Shiwen was surprised to see the shadow of a figure ascending from it. This figure possessed unparalleled ominous power. It was Mu Xingjie's soul fragment. It had ruptured Yi Ziwen's palm in one fell swoop. Qiao Yuyu had escaped the peril on the other side. However, his vitality had sustained huge injuries after he had spouted a mouthful of blood essence. He didn't even have the strength to stay afloat anymore. He fell down from the sky and smashed onto a pile of rocks. His life was saved, but he had obviously been crippled now. However, Yi Shiwen didn't have time to care about whether Qiao Yuyu was dead or alive at this moment. It was because Mu Xingjie's soul present before him had exerted a huge coercion on him. It was just a wisp of soul. However, it had exerted more pressure on him than Qiao Yuyu had. Qiao Yuyu had arrived here in person. However, he was merely an expert of initial stage of half-step Great Sage realm. But Mu Xingjie was a genuine Great Sage expert on the other hand. In fact, he was a top-tier Great Sage expert. He lost. I hadn't expected that Qiao Yuyu would lose. Yi Shiwen is outrageously strong. He's far more than just outrageously strong. Qiao Yuyu is an expert of initial stage of half-step Great Sage realm. And Yi Shiwen is only a Sage Small Perfection level expert. A Sage Small Perfection level expert should have been nothing in front of Qiao Yuyu. However, he has defeated Qiao Yuyu. It's truly a miracle. It seems that you don't know. Yi Shiwen belongs to our generation. And our generation has the most powerful people. Will also excel in the future. So, you old people will regret it in the future if you try to bully us. Cut the crap. You can talk about being ferocious, but it's only Yi Shiwen who is ferocious. You lot are nothing. You want to hoot in front of this old man. You're still several hundred years behind. There are many geniuses in this world. However, I can say with confidence that there isn't any genius in this generation who can surpass Yi Shiwen. A Sage Small Perfection level expert has repelled an expert of initial stage of half-step Great Sage realm. Just hearing about such incredible strength can scare a person to death. Everyone on the Hidden Star Peak is abnormal and monstrous. I would have chosen the Hidden Star Peak if I had known this earlier. The Hidden Star Peak may become a popular choice for everyone in the next session. I've heard that Huang Wuji and the others are about to return. The Hidden Star Peak may see a resurgence at that time. Several of the disciples who were watching the fight had become excited after Yi Shiwen had defeated Qiao Yuyu with ease. After all, nobody had been optimistic that Yi Shiwen could defeat Qiao Yuyu in the beginning. However, Yi Shiwen had accomplished it. Moreover, he had defeated Qiao Yuyu while fooling around. It didn't seem that Yi Shiwen had lacked by one realm as compared to Qiao Yuyu. There was a lot of noise in the surroundings since everyone was discussing. However, Yi Shiwen didn't look relaxed. He was staring at the wisp of soul that was present before him. After all, it was a much bigger problem for him than Qiao Yuyu had been. The Phoenix regeneration technique could restore Yi Zaiwen's injuries at an astonishing speed. However, it couldn't do so instantly. After all, the injuries sustained by a great sage tool couldn't heal so quickly. You're very courageous. However, I hadn't expected that you would amount to anything, Mu Shengjie said. His overbearing gaze was shining on Yi Zaiwen's body. Mu Shengjie's words suddenly made the entire world quiet. Everyone was looking at him. They knew that another battle between two giants might break out soon. Moreover, it would be a much more intense battle than the previous one. Everyone again looked at Yi Shiwen under this pin-drop silence. They didn't know how he would react. However, they knew to what extent this situation could grow. Therefore, they were trying to see Yi Zaiwen's reaction. The fight could begin just the way the people of Law Enforcement Hall wanted. However, how it would end was beyond their control. Could it be that you're having regrets? Yi Shiwen grinned. It seemed as if he wasn't facing a big shot of the Law Enforcement Hall. Instead, it seemed as if he was facing an ordinary person. In fact, he was even talking with a bit of sarcasm. Mu Shengjie might have already crushed Yi Shiwen to death if he had attacked him personally in their previous confrontation. However, he had unfortunately used a wisp of his soul avatar at that time, and that wisp of soul had been defeated by Yi Shiwen. Regret? Mu Shengjie let out a disdainful expression from the corner of his mouth. He hadn't said it clearly. However, his words contained contempt for Yi Shiwen. Yi Zaiwen's growth was indeed beyond Mu Shengjie's expectation. However, Mu Shengjie believed that Yi Shiwen still fell far short when it came to making him regret. He believed that an ant would remain an ant even if it grew up. He himself was like an eagle in the sky, and his goal was the sea of stars. So he couldn't care less about the ants crawling on the ground. You're merely a wisp of soul. So, why are you so arrogant? I've won this fight, and this demon-inscribed tablet is my spoil of war. Yi Shiwen didn't pay attention to the disdainful look in Mu Shengjie's eyes, and just opened his mouth to smile. Yi Shiwen had smiled in a mocking manner. His smile was very much like sunlight. Everyone went in uproar. Did he just challenge Mu Shengjie to his face? It's indeed just a wisp of his soul. However, challenging Mu Shengjie is an entirely different matter as compared to challenging Qiao Yuyu. Chapter 597. The curtain drops. However, not everyone was thinking that. Some people knew that it wasn't the first time that Yi Shiwen had challenged Mu Shengjie. It was just a wisp of his soul. But still, only a few people would dare to challenge him. However, Yi Shiwen had already challenged him twice by now. The people who knew that Yi Shiwen had already challenged Mu Shengjie once in the past were very calm and collected. It had happened once. So what if it had happened again? Yi Shiwen hadn't even reached the sage realm back then. Many people sighed with emotion. Yi Shiwen is an unruly person. He considers everyone beneath him. He doesn't even give importance to Mu Shengjie. In fact, it seems that he won't even pay attention to the Lord of the University if he gets an opportunity in the future, and enters the Great Sage Realm. Yi Shiwen didn't know what these people were thinking. Otherwise, he would have expelled it as nonsense. Some people were calling him unruly. However, they seemed to have forgotten that it was Mu Shengjie who was provoking him at present. Should Yi Shiwen still have welcomed him with a smiling face? Should he have extended his face for Mu Shengjie to slap on? That wasn't Yi Zaiwen's style. Their so-called rules seemed to put restrictions on him and bully him. How could he possibly submit to such humiliation? It'll shatter the heaven if it tries to suppress me. It'll trample the earth if it tries to constrain me. It'll even annihilate God if he tries to bully me. Even if they break my legs and crush my backbone. Everyone was speechlessly looking at this reckless guy. Only Yi Shiwen can dare to say that he'll keep Mu Shengjie's divine tool as his spoils of war. Wild, Mu Shengjie said. His ice-cold voice sounded like a calm ancient well. He seemed neither sad nor happy. In fact, it seemed as if he was looking at a dead man. There wasn't the least bit of emotional fluctuations on his face. Yi Shiwen didn't say anything. He was about to attack. However, a streamer of light flashed in the sky all of a sudden. Then, a figure arrived while treading the flying light. Yi Shiwen looked at that figure. It was Qi Fifan. Senior brother Qi. Yi Shiwen shouted. However, his brows wrinkled. What is Qi Fifan doing here at this time? Yi Shiwen had just returned to the true martial world, so he hadn't gotten the time to catch up with these old friends. The former Yi Shiwen would have thought that 10 years' time was a very long period. However, the current Yi Shiwen believed that a person stayed in closed-door training for a comparatively longer time than 10 years. Yi Shiwen had experienced many things in the last 10 years. However, it wasn't a very long time for him. Therefore, he wasn't in a hurry to meet his old friends. Qi Fifan had also entered the Sage Realm peak within a short time of over a decade. And he wouldn't need many years to enter the late stage of half-step Great Sage Realm. However, his cultivation speed would also begin to drag like most of the other people soon after had entered the Great Sage Realm. Qi Fifan turned to look at Yi Shiwen, and nodded. He didn't say anything. Then he looked towards the wisp of Mu Xingjia's soul, and said, I've arrived here to present the Lord's orders to you. This battle must stop at once. The winner and loser have already been decided, so there's no need to continue this fight. Everyone was disappointed by the fact that Qi Fifan had arrived to end this matter. However, this was a normal thing since this matter involved Yi Shiwen, Qiao Yuyu, and Mu Xingjia. These three men were invincible experts at the heights of their power, and they might become Super Heaven's Pride experts in the future. Each of these men was an exceptional expert. True Martial University didn't care too much about ordinary disciples. After all, countless people would arrive in the university in every session. In fact, the True Martial University might not be able to clearly calculate how many disciples it had. Therefore, it was impossible for the university to manage everyone's affair. However, these three men were Heaven's Pride experts. The higher-ups used to take special care of the Heaven's Pride experts of every session. Therefore, the status of these Heaven's Pride experts wasn't ordinary. Qiao Yuyu had followed Mu Xingjia on an expedition for many years. He had worked hard, and had performed great service. And Yi Shiwen had also done a few great services for the university. Therefore, it would be a huge loss for True Martial University, no matter who won and who lost in the fight between these two individuals. So, this was the most appropriate step under the present situation when the outcome had already been decided. Everyone quickly understood the Supreme Lord's intention. However, the two men involved in this matter frowned. It was clear that they were very much dissatisfied. Only a wisp Mu Xingjia's soul was present here. However, it still possessed extremely powerful strength. Mu Xingjia wanted to take the advantage of this opportunity and kill an unstable element like Yi Shiwen on the spot. He wanted to get rid of a potential future trouble. Any Heaven's Pride expert was a treasure for the university. Yi Shiwen had earlier killed the Titan body, but that was because the owner of Titan body, Second God, had paid a very high price for the opportunity to organize a mortal combat between himself and Yi Shiwen. In fact, even a powerhouse like Mu Xingjia had to force the high-level experts to give in for the declaration of mortal combat that Qiao Yuyu had sent to Yi Shiwen. After all, it was impossible to kill Yi Shiwen without tricks. Mu Xingjia couldn't do so even if he was rampant and domineering. After all, it would have disturbed the university's foundation. Could he treat Heaven's Pride experts like cabbages that he could cut them one by one? Every Heaven's Pride expert was a treasure that might become the backbone of the university in the future. He couldn't kill Yi Shiwen this time, and it would be troublesome for him to find another opportunity to do so. Yi Shiwen wasn't satisfied either. He had also wanted to take advantage of this opportunity and suppress the wisp of Mu Xingjia's soul. After all, he would have obtained an incomplete Great Sage tool if he had been able to do so. He would have let Yemo swallow it so that Heavenly Source Mirror could thoroughly transform into a Great Sage tool. Moreover, his safety factor would have increased enormously after he had the protection of a Great Sage tool. The world was so big. He could go anywhere. The Supreme Lord had personally interfered in this fight. But, could this battle still continue? He didn't care about Qiao Yuyu. He had already defeated him no matter if he had died or not. Humph! You're lucky today. Mu Xingjie coldly snorted. He then transformed into a streamer of light, curled up Qiao Yuyu, and disappeared into the horizon. Yi Shiwen looked with his ice-cold vision in the direction in which the wisp of Mu Xingjie's soul had disappeared. It was a bit unfortunate for him. It's a pity that I've lost this opportunity. It's extremely unfortunate indeed. The heavenly source mirror would have definitely entered the great sage realm if it had swallowed that demon-inscribed tablet. Yi Mo sighed and said, he was the one who regretted this lost opportunity the most. Inside the microcosm, behind the layers of space, Zhao Fiji's face also exposed a regretful expression as she saw this scene. It was very unfortunate that they couldn't kill Yi Shiwen this time. However, the order to stop the fight had been issued by the Supreme Lord. So, she couldn't dare to question it no matter how courageous she was. Qi Fifan also saw the unhappy expression on Yi Ziwen's face. Many people thought that Yi Shiwen had been lucky this time, and the Supreme Lord's order had saved him. However, Qi Fifan didn't think so. On the contrary, he felt that it had been more of a hindrance than a help for Yi Shiwen. Younger brother Yi has often astonished people in the last few decades. When has he not overcome a disaster? Every enemy has fallen under his feet no matter how formidable they had been. Yi Shiwen was a Heaven's Pride expert just like his opponent the legendary Mu Xingjie. However, he was far less experienced than him. Qi Fifan had heard too many things about Mu Xingjie after arriving at the true martial university. However, Yi Ziwen's opponent at present was merely a wisp of Mu Xingjie's soul. It was indeed formidable. But it wasn't unbeatable for Yi Shiwen. After all, Yi Shiwen had always been wise and full of all kinds of tricks. Qi Fifan looked at Yi Shiwen with a sense of apology. He said, I'm sorry, young Yi. It seems that I've interfered in your business. Yi Shiwen grinned, and didn't nag about this issue. He then said, what happened? How come this matter has alarmed the Supreme Lord? Yi Shiwen knew that Qi Fifan used to work under the Supreme Lord. In fact, it was said that he had become his favorite disciple. Moreover, there were rumors about him being one of the candidates for the position of the Lord in the future. However, Yi Shiwen knew that these were merely rumors. After all, someone who wanted to take the position of the Lord must convince the masses of their strength. The true martial university was a big organization, and it had been functioning since countless years. So, it already had a set method to decide this. Candidate selection wasn't necessarily in control of the main authorities. One must possess decision-making ability and enough tyrannical strength. These things were most important. Qi Fifan's strength was still too weak, as far as becoming the Lord of true martial university was concerned. After all, a sage expert like him was nothing in comparison to those frequent great sage competitors. The results would be revealed after several hundred years. The Supreme Lord would retire from his position, and the competition for the position of the Lord would become intense. It's not like that. Many old and high-level experts are alarmed since this fight also involved Mu Xingjie. You must know that these old experts are very optimistic about Mu Xingjie. They want him to take over the position of the University Lord. Qi Fifan somewhat helplessly said. Take over the position of the University Lord. This matter will take place after several hundred years. Who can say with certainty that it'll be Mu Xingjie who takes over? Yi Shiwen let out a grin from the corner of his mouth and replied. Mu Xingjie was a popular candidate. However, it wasn't certain that he would be chosen. For example, Big Brother Huang Wuji was also a popular candidate. However, Huang Wuji had a flaw, and this flaw was that the hidden star peak wasn't influential enough. It only had a few people, so they couldn't give him a strong support. It seems that the Lord is very optimistic about you, senior brother. In fact, senior brother might also have a chance after several hundred years. Yi Shiwen laughed and said. Yi Shiwen wasn't interested in the position of the Lord. So it would be better if Qi Fifan occupied the top position instead of Mu Xingjie. After all, Yi Shiwen would come across very few troublesome matters in that case. Yi Shiwen pondered a little, and understood the Lord's intention behind sending Qi Fifan. It didn't matter who would have won in this fight. Qi Fifan would have gained the gratitude of one of the two parties involved, and this would have increased his support base. However, this tactic had obviously failed. Neither side had bought it. Instead, both sides had felt that they would have smoothly settled the opposite party if Qi Fifan hadn't interfered. However, Qi Fifan hadn't figured it out yet. Therefore, he didn't dare to wait for the situation to become dire. After all, his intervention would have been pointless in that case. Well, this matter will take place after several hundred years, so nobody can say for sure. Qi Fifan didn't directly deny. After all, he also harbored ambitions when it came to the Supreme Lord's position. However, he didn't possess the strength required for this position. So he must quietly continue to improve his strength through cultivation, and wait patiently. On the contrary, I must congratulate younger brother. You disappeared for about 10 years, and your strength has already far surpassed mine now. Qi Fifan said the truth. He was also proud and arrogant. However, this was the only thing he could say while facing Yi Shiwen, who used to be far behind him back then. Qi Fifan had entered the Sage Realm and cultivated to the Sage Realm peak in the last 10 years. It was very fast speed. However, it was simply nothing when compared to that of Yi Shiwen. Chapter 598. Hand over Yi Shiwen? No. Yi Shiwen was merely at the Sage Small Perfection realm. However, everyone had witnessed his fighting prowess. Qiao Yuyu was a top-tier expert of the initial stage of half-step Great Sage Realm. However, he had still been effortlessly defeated by Yi Shiwen. Therefore, the tyranny of Yi Ziwen's strength was evident. Qi Fifan forced a smile, and shook his head. Yi Shiwen had already revealed his talent when he had been in the Yiyuan school. However, Qi Fifan hadn't anticipated that Yi Shiwen would be able to display his talent in a place like the True Martial University as well. After all, the True Martial University was filled with geniuses. Yi Shiwen had caused trouble everywhere, and it was apparent that nobody had been able to suppress his limelight. Qi Fifan admitted that nobody among Yi Ziwen's peers could beat him as per his current cultivation. However, it wasn't like Yi Ziwen's peers were the only people in this world. Basically, you've saved a tiny life. Yi Shiwen grinned. Qi Fifan was secretly surprised. It turns out that Yi Shiwen had a hidden trump up his sleeve. After all, he said saved a tiny life. He obviously hasn't said this about Qiao Yuyu. Therefore, it can only be about Mu Xingjia. Yi Shiwen had disappeared only for a short time of about 10 years. But he already had a hidden card to contend against Mu Xingjia. Yi Shiwen had just said that Qi Fifan had saved a tiny life. However, it would have been a miracle if Yi Shiwen had survived from the hands of a peerless and ominous person like Mu Xingjia. Qi Fifan didn't have the assurance to escape from Mu Xingjia's hands at present. It couldn't be said where he would stand after several hundred years. However, he was like an ant in front of him at this time. Or maybe slightly better than ant. I see. So, Yi Shiwen indeed had a method to escape from Mu Xingjia's hands. Then it isn't surprising that he has dared to challenge Mu Xingjia. After all, he had a backup plan this entire time. But then Qi Fifan smiled. Yi Shiwen looks reckless and crude on the surface. It seems that he would charge into a fight without a plan. However, I know for a fact that he is very shrewd deep down. After all, when have I seen him losing? He became somewhat depressed as he thought this. It seems that I haven't gained any benefits by coming here. Both the parties involved are dissatisfied. So there rests no way in hell I'm gaining any gratitude from them. Younger brother, would you have seized the demon-inscribed tablet if I hadn't come? Qi Fifan asked. Yi Shiwen nodded. There was nothing to hide since the heavenly source mirror desperately needed the demon-inscribed tablet at present. So, Yi Shiwen wouldn't have let it go at any cost if it had fallen into his hands. Qi Fifan was left dumbstruck. Yi Shiwen isn't some average maverick. It was indeed merely a wisp of Mu Xingjia's soul. And Yi Shiwen could naturally deal with it without any issue. However, that doesn't change the fact that having to deal with a great sage would be a thorny problem for Yi Shiwen. Perhaps Mu Xingjia himself would have come out of his closed-door training if Yi Shiwen had dared to seize the demon-inscribed tablet. This matter has ended now. So, would you like to come to visit our hidden star peak? Yi Shiwen asked. I'll pass. Master had sent me here to settle the dispute between the two of you. So I'll return and report to him now that it has been settled, Qi Fifan replied. This day's matter had made him enough depressed. So, how could he be in a mood to stay any longer? Yi Shiwen also didn't stay any longer. He treaded the flying light, and soon entered the hidden star peak. Several disciples of the true martial university had been watching the fight from the surroundings. They had a stunned look on their faces as they looked at Yi Shiwen leaving the scene. There was a brief moment of silence. Then, the crowd erupted like a volcano. What kind of treasure has he obtained that he possesses such scary strength? He has limitless future prospects. Another invincible man has taken birth. And he might also create countless legends and myths in the future. It's good that Yi Shiwen is so powerful. All the big forces are going to encircle and attack the devil race together this time. And there's going to be a contest between the younger generations on the battlefield. Yi Shiwen is very powerful. So he'll certainly bring glory to my university. The high-level experts of the True Martial University gathered inside a microcosm in the depths of the True Martial Mountain Range as Yi Shiwen returned to the hidden star peak. They had done so in order to convene the first high-level meeting. In the meeting, the Supreme Lord of the True Martial University was sitting on an elevated and towering throne. Many respected elders and chiefs of the top 10 big inheritances were sitting beside him on smaller thrones. This meeting could be regarded as a very high level in the True Martial University as per the lineup and the status of the people involved. Well, discuss the diplomatic note sent by the Emergence School from the depths of starry space, the Supreme Lord said in a faint but dignified voice. His voice was so ethereal that people couldn't make out anything from his words. They couldn't tell whether he was happy or angry. Yes, we've already seen the diplomatic note that has been sent by the Emergence School. This has happened because of that disciple Yi Shiwen. This boy is reckless. He has killed a disciple of the Emergence School. This has dealt a serious blow to them. They will definitely send punitive forces against us this time. A senior great sage woman said at this time. She was dressed up in dark green clothes. Her clothes made her personality look even more outstanding. Moreover, she possessed tyrannical strength. She was the chief of one of the top 10 big inheritances, the Fair Maiden Peak. 1/3 of the female disciples of True Martial University belonged to her peak. Women's martial arts were much more difficult than men's martial arts. In fact, it was even more difficult to get out of a bottleneck. However, it was only difficult in comparison to the men's martial arts, and nothing more. True Martial University had many female disciples, and there were many tyrannical ones among them. However, 1/3 of the female disciples in the True Martial University belonged to this great sage woman's peak. Therefore, she was a well-known and powerful figure in the True Martial University. She was a woman. However, she had still come so far, and risen to the high-level lineup of the True Martial University. Therefore, one could well imagine her strength. Humph! They are making so much noise just because of the death of a core disciple. They're too lame. They don't have the demeanor of a big sect. A black-clothed old man coldly snorted and said. He was none other than the black-clothed elder of the Law Enforcement Hall. He had been wielding the Law Enforcement Hall's authority of inflicting punishment for many years. He had profound majesty. The gazes of the other big shots turned towards the black-clothed old man. The hatred between Yi Shiwen and the Law Enforcement Hall was already a publicly known affair. So they hadn't expected that he would say this at such a time. He hadn't said it explicitly. However, it seemed as if he was kind of defending Yi Shiwen. Everyone was left dumbstruck. Did we just miss here? Or, has this black-clothed elder of the Law Enforcement Hall taken the wrong medicine or something? However, it wasn't that there was no one who understood the reason behind that elder's comment. Some people were well aware of the black-clothed elder's attitude. He wasn't defending Yi Shiwen. Instead, it was that the Law Enforcement Hall was like that only. It could be said that the majority of the True Martial University's radicals were gathered in the Law Enforcement Hall. And these people couldn't accept making any compromise with the external forces. They preferred bloody battles and expeditions. Therefore, it would be better to say that he was expressing his resentment towards Emergence School instead of saying that he was defending Yi Shiwen. Even the Supreme Lord knew of the Law Enforcement Hall's absolute loyalty towards the university. That was why he had been tolerating the hegemony of the Law Enforcement Hall for so many years. Yeah. What is the worth of a core disciple? There are millions of core disciples in the Emergence School. Why all this fuss at the death of one such disciple? They just want to force us to compromise using this matter as an excuse. It's truly a good strategy. A senior great sage elder coldly snorted and said, "This means that the Emergence School are up to no good." These people had started to arrive in the true martial world in large numbers after a rumor had spread out more than a decade ago. Some information about this matter is mentioned in our ancient books and records. They're simply acting on hearsay evidence. A great sage elder said indignantly, "They surely have bad intentions. They want to use this matter as an excuse to meddle in the true martial world's affairs. They want to turn our university into their puppet. And this is something we can't accept." Some people were in favor of taking tough action against external forces, while some others weren't. However, they then heard someone saying in a languid manner, "I think the Emergence School's words also make some sense. Let's presume that we hand over Yi Shiwen to them. Then what else can they say? Afterwards, they won't be able to do anything if we just keep holding our ground strongly." This man's opinion also received many affirmations. After all, the true martial university's status had declined, and they didn't want to be targeted at this sensitive time. The entire game would be lost if those people arrived here and went all out. The true martial university couldn't take such a gamble. Retreat, retreat, retreat. How much should we retreat? Many elders have laid the foundation of this land by fighting bloody battles. And we're giving up in such a small matter? The complexion of the black-clothed elder turned a deep shade of red with anger as he continued. Moreover, we must show them that it's not a good idea to provoke us. It's impossible for the entire Emergence School to arrive here. However, it won't be a big deal even if they arrive in full capacity. We'll give them a battle of life or death. Well, this matter hasn't reached to that point yet, the Supreme Lord said. His voice sounded even more ethereal. The Emergence School just wants an excuse to meddle in true martial world's affairs. That's all. Apparently, they are facing many difficulties in settling inside the Wind Dragon City. So they want to come over to the true martial world. The chief of the Fair Maiden Peak said. They'll find another excuse later if we hand over Yi Shiwen this time. There are millions of disciples in our university, and the Emergence School also has innumerable disciples. So they can find hundreds of thousands of our disciples to use as an excuse. Will we hand over every single one of them? Moreover, we can't become impatient in this matter. And we can't allow this matter to break out. Otherwise, the university might fall apart. It would cause a huge uproar if this matter got spread outside. After all, Yi Shiwen was still a Heaven's Pride expert of the true martial university. This meant that he had been nurtured with care. So wouldn't everyone feel insecure if they handed him over? What kind of prestige and unity would the true martial university have in that case? Yi Shiwen had previously killed a Heaven's Pride expert of Xianyuan Palace Hall, and they had arrived to punish him. However, the true martial university hadn't made any compromise. Instead, they had counterattacked. They had taken advantage of Xianyuan Palace Hall's mistake and had defeated them convincingly. However, the situation was different this time. After all, the Emergence School was a formidable force that ruled a big world, which was located in the depths of the starry space. They were much stronger than the Xianyuan Palace. These two forces naturally couldn't be compared. Well, this matter ends here. The Emergence School wants to fight? Then, we'll give it to them, the Supreme Lord insipidly said. Many elders became excited one after another. This confidence of theirs had entirely stemmed from the Supreme Lord. He had become a heaven-warping invincible person many years ago. And he had established great prestige over the years. Who could dare to look down on him? Yi Shiwen didn't know that many high-level experts were arguing about his matter. However, he also didn't have the time to think about this. That was because he must undergo closed-door training and make a breakthrough. Chapter 599. Yi Shiwen would require huge amounts of primary spirit dawn every time he wanted to make a breakthrough. His cultivation hadn't made a major breakthrough in the last few years, so he wanted to improve his cultivation and take some time to lay a solid foundation. But there had been a shortage of primary spirit dawn that entire time. However, the situation was different now. His total wealth had surpassed 1.7 billion primary spirit dawn after he had sold his heavenly treasures as well as seized wealth from young master Jin Xiao. This amount would be more than enough for other people to cultivate up to Great Sage realm. In fact, even Great Sage experts usually didn't possess this much wealth. However, Yi Ziwen's consumption was insane. Still, his current wealth was enough to make the breakthrough. His foundation had already been firmly established after traveling for a few years, and he had enough primary spirit dawn now. Therefore, it was only natural for this breakthrough to happen. The reason why he wanted to make the breakthrough urgently was that the Devil World competition was about to begin. All the forces of the true martial world would participate in this competition. Only the core disciples were taking part in this competition. However, it could still be regarded as a martial arts competition of the highest level. The common partition criteria in true martial world and other forces suggested that a person would automatically become a core disciple after they had entered Sage realm, and those above this rank were the true disciples who were the experts of Great Sage level. However, an ordinary person would at most become an elder even if they luckily entered the Great Sage realm. There was very rare chance of them becoming a true disciple. In fact, even an ordinary Heaven's Pride expert didn't have this qualification. One could only have a small probability of reaching up to the Great Sage realm if they didn't go on extraordinary adventures. However, those true disciples had the opportunity to make a breakthrough into the Great Sage realm, as well as become a persona like the Supreme Lord. There might not be even one true disciple among several Heaven's Pride experts of several sessions. Mu Xingjie, Yi Ziwen's big brother, second sister and third brother were true disciples. The Hidden Star Peak had a very few people. However, each of them was an outstanding expert. Therefore, nobody dared to belittle the Hidden Star Peak. On top of that, it also had an enigmatic and unfathomable chief. It didn't matter if a core disciple died. However, the death of one true disciple could injure the strength of a force. Therefore, such secret competitions couldn't be expanded to the true disciples. The true disciples possessed huge strength. They were as powerful as the elders. Each of them was extremely tyrannical. Just like Huang Wuji and Mu Xingjie, they could run amok without any hesitation. Therefore, the true disciples were the essence of a force. In fact, one could clearly predict whether a force could become rich and powerful in the future by looking at the number of its true disciples. A true disciple could wield the authority over a country and become its overlord if they felt like doing so. This competition would be the most intense collision between a large number of disciples. Therefore, even Yi Shiwen had no choice but to be careful. He had defeated Qiao Yuyu. However, Qiao Yuyu was a disciple of a relatively newer session. His cultivation time was still very short. He was far insignificant in comparison to those disciples who had arrived 1,000 or more years ago. Yi Ziwen's current strength entailed that he had entered the most powerful group of core disciples. However, only barely so. And he wouldn't be able to oust this group unless he were to bring out the Star Colossus avatar. On top of that, the disciples of True Martial University weren't the only ones participating in this competition. The disciples of many other forces would display their skills therein. The Devil World also had outstanding youths of Devil race. The true martial world considered this matter as an opportunity to temper their disciples. But Yi Mo had suggested that the Devil race also thought so. After all, a great number of outstanding youths of Devil race would arrive every time. The law enforcement hall had suffered a huge loss this time. Therefore, it was very much possible that they would try to get back at Yi Shiwen. And then there was the Xianyuan Hall as well. The Xianyuan Palace Hall apparently had resentment with Yi Shiwen since a long time. Many people had suspected Yi Shiwen after a Heaven's Pride expert had died at his hands. After that, Pang Yongba's inexplicable death had also made many people suspicious of Yi Shiwen. After all, Yi Shiwen had been present there at that time. Moreover, Only he and Qi Fifan had come out of there alive. These uncertain factors had pushed Yi Shiwen to make the breakthrough urgently. Otherwise, he could have come across a big trouble at the time when the gate of the devil world would open. He had many enemies and friends. It was just that there was hardly any person who could help him at this critical time. Therefore, he could only rely on himself. The Hidden Star Peak had a very good environment for closed-door training. It only had a few people. Therefore, everyone over there could enjoy far more resources than ordinary people. All kinds of matrix formations that absorbed spirit energies had become fully operational. The spirit energies present inside the room where Yi Shiwen was undergoing closed-door training had been liquefied already. Therefore, he had obtained great benefits by absorbing those spirit energies. This was possible because the Hidden Star Peak had a very deep background. The other inheritances might also have such background. However, they mightn't be able to provide the support of so much spirit energies to one expert. And that's because they simply had too many people. Yi Ziwen's body was like a huge bottomless pit. Endless spirit energies had been absorbed by him. The observing person scripture was working with all its might. Countless primary spirit dawn had been burning inside the heavenly source mirror. And the spirit energies were flowing inside his body just like a long river. Yi Ziwen's body was emitting bursts of golden light. And these lights were illuminating the entire room where he was undergoing the closed-door training. The real elemental energy surged about inside his body just like waves, and began to attack the barrier of the Sage Great Perfection realm under his command. His extremely strong foundation had enabled him to skip levels to fight those of higher levels. However, it had also made it 1,000 times more difficult for him to progress. His martial power had already surpassed the Sage Small Perfection realm. However, it still looked weak when he was attacking the barrier of the Sage Great Perfection realm. However, endless burning spirit energies were rushing inside his body at this time. They were replenishing the power of his real elemental energy, and scouring it unceasingly. Yi Shiwen had immersed into his mysterious space, while attacking the barrier of the Sage Great Perfection realm. He was unceasingly deducing all kinds of mysteries of the Sage Great Perfection realm. A cultivator must have tyrannical power, and incredible magical powers in order to make a breakthrough into a realm. But he must also have deep understanding of that realm. Accumulating power would be just a matter of time as long as they had achieved the understanding of the realm that they were attempting to break through to. The so-called levitating heavenwards in a day and overnight epiphany is the best explanation of this. It could be said that the current Yi Shiwen was understanding all kinds of mysteries of the Sage Great Perfection realm at a flying speed as compared to earlier. He had deduced the mysteries of this realm initially. However, he hadn't crossed over to this level because of being at the lower realm. Therefore, his comprehension speed had been slow. However, the situation was different now. His speed of understanding of all kinds of worldly principles had increased since he had transformed his soul by now. In fact, it had reached to the pinnacle. It seemed as if a great sage expert had comprehended a good deal of mysteries of Sage Realm. As if it was a piece of cake. His speed was naturally much faster than earlier. It was on a whole new level. Yi Ziwen's imposing aura was also gradually rising. It had been rising easily at first. However, it had soon become increasingly difficult. It seemed as if he was climbing a mountain. It would get more difficult every time his imposing aura rose a bit. The enlightening mind ancient tree exhibited its figure behind Yi Shiwen. Countless spirit energies were pouring inside it. Consequently, the tree emitted colorful divine rays, and enveloped Yi Shiwen. This was also the reason why Yi Shiwen had swallowed great amount of spirit energies earlier. It was impossible for the enlightening mind ancient tree to grow, unless it had been fed with countless spirit energies. Time passed day by day. The tense atmosphere inside the entire True Martial University had gradually begun to become lively, because the Devil World competition was soon going to start. Many experts who had been out on expeditions for many years had also returned one after another. Such joint competition wasn't something that used to take place frequently. Instead, it used to take place once in 200 or 300 years. So many people who had been on expeditions outside had returned to participate in this competition. They would obtain the university's reward if they could obtain a good rank in this competition. especially those people who would defeat the outstanding heroes in the competition and earn glory for the university would obtain more attention and a lot of benefits from the university. Basically, these people could be considered as the elites in the sage realm, and their target was definitely Great Sage Realm. It was impossible for many people to cross this line if there were no fortuitous chances for them to reap. The entire true martial university was cheering for all these core disciples who were about to take part in the competition. These core disciples weren't as rare as the true disciples. However, it could be said that each one of them possessed profound roots in the true martial university and had a big backing. Each of these senior disciples had a big range of support behind them. Each of them had a network of connections and interest chains. It was early morning. There was a lively and bustling scene everywhere. However, the hidden star peak was still quiet. Bang! A terrifying aura swept out from the hidden star peak. It condensed into an energy pillar and soared to the sky. It rushed to the ninth heaven and shook all directions. The aura momentarily got suppressed by the matrix formations that had been set up above the hidden star peak. However, it still couldn't elude the gazes of the resolutely curious people who had been paying attention to the hidden star peak. Yi Shiwen has come out of the closed-door training. A loud cry revealed the secret. Many divine senses suddenly gathered in the sky above the hidden star peak, and they all began to discuss in the sky. 1 year of closed-door training. Yi Shiwen might have become even more ferocious after this 1 year. The Devil World competition should have a place for him this time. It can't be said for sure. After all, the experts of our true martial university aren't the only ones participating this time. The most tyrannical people among the core disciples of the entire true martial world will gather for the Devil World competition. In fact, anyone below half-step Great Sage Realm is a nonentity. They can only collect some leftover benefits. They are simply not worth mentioning. It may be possible that the top-tier experts of the late stage of half-step Great Sage Realm might also be there. Some abnormal Heaven's Pride experts must be planning to take advantage of this time's competition and make a breakthrough into the Great Sage Realm in one fell swoop. A person like Yi Shiwen may look pretty good at present. However, he's still far behind those abnormal monsters. It is said that the Law Enforcement Hall's Heavenly Punishment faction is also participating this time in order to deal with those abnormal monsters. Otherwise, obtaining the first place will remain a dream for our true martial university. That isn't right. We still have a hope to get the first place. A cold snort transmitted from inside the hidden star peak when these divine senses were arguing endlessly. The matrix formations immediately became operational and isolated the hidden star peak from the probing divine senses of all people. A cyan figure rose from the hidden star peak at this time. It was Yi Shiwen. Yi Shiwen said, "I finally stepped into the Sage Great Perfection realm." Chapter 600. Devil World Trial begins. Yi Shiwen clenched his fist, and his face exposed a happy expression. He had finally crossed the threshold to the Sage Great Perfection realm. He had been cultivating almost the entire period in the last 1 year's time, and he had finally entered the Sage Great Perfection realm now. Yi Ziwen's fighting strength had increased enormously now that he had entered the Sage Great Perfection realm. His fighting strength had entered the intermediate stage of half-step Great Sage realm in one fell swoop. This strength couldn't be considered as the strongest. However, this was still a big progress from what he had been 1 year ago. He could now face those monsters among the core disciples with relative ease. In fact, he wouldn't even need to summon the Star Colossus avatar for that. Yi Shiwen had learnt about several important subjects in his expedition of about 10 years. He had taken advantage of the last 1 year's time and integrated the understanding of these subjects into his epiphany. Therefore, the enlightenment that he had gained from his epiphany could now reach to the peak. In fact, the Sage Accomplished realm was also a matter of time now. He would move unhindered once he entered the Sage Accomplished realm, unless a formidable Great Sage expert attacked him. Yi Shiwen, the Great Sage realm is like a natural moat for most of the people. However, it's just an ordinary milestone for you. You've already completed the transformation of soul, and the other people can't be compared with you in terms of this advantage. You just lack overtime accumulation of energy and consolidation now. Yi Mo's voice resounded in Yi Zaiwen's mind. Yi Shiwen nodded. Entering the Great Sage realm wouldn't be a difficult thing for him, if he got a time of 40 to 50 years to consolidate properly. He had already crossed the step that was most difficult for other people. However, consolidation and accumulation, something which most people took for granted, had become the things that he lacked the most at present. The world is so big. You can go anywhere once you enter the Great Sage realm. You'll be also considered as a top-tier character inside the endless starry space. Yi Mo added. However, the joyful expression on Yi Zaiwen's face suddenly got replaced by a cold one. I'm still not capable of going to the ancient Phoenix world, Yi Shiwen said. Yi Mo immediately became silent. How could he have forgotten? Yi Shiwen had been thinking about this matter almost all the time in the last decade. He seemed carefree on the surface. However, he was still brooding with the thought that Hua Menghan had been abducted by that Feng Ling guy. However, Yi Shiwen immediately got rid of this thought, and didn't brood over this issue any further. The sound of ringing of bell came from the sky at this moment. It sounded like an age-old and boundless sound. It seemed as if this sound had been ringing since times immemorial. It could shake people's hearts. Yi Shiwen knew that this was the signal to inform that the Devil World competition was going to start. This was done so that the disciples who had to leave for the Devil World could assemble in the true martial university. This bell would keep ringing for more than 3 days and nights, and spark the return of a lot of talents to the university. Yang Wenjun and Deng Shui Xian would also go from the Hidden Star Peak in addition to Yi Shiwen this time. In other words, every inheritance would send their most experienced seniors. However, Hidden Star Peak didn't have too many people. Moreover, Bai Jiansong had recently entered the Great Sage realm. So, he wasn't qualified to participate in this time's Devil World competition. Big brother, second sister, and third brother Bai Jiansong had left a huge impact in the previous Devil World competitions. They had earned glory in the Devil World. Yang Wenjun and Deng Shui Xian had never participated in the Devil World competition, and Yi Shiwen was also a newcomer. Therefore, it could be said the Hidden Star Peak had sent an inexperienced troop this time. You're going to the Devil World this time. Bai Jiansong looked at these 3 individuals. You must display the might of our Hidden Star Peak. Slaughter all those devil bastards for me. Bai Jiansong's face exposed a murderous look as he said. The faces of these 3 individuals covered with sweat. Does he consider those people of the devil race as cabbages that we can chop them up with a knife? Moreover, the experts of various factions of devil race will come. They're going to be very difficult to deal with. However, these 3 individuals also knew that Bai Jiansong had said this to Yi Shiwen. Yang Wenjun and Deng Shui Xian were also going. However, they were barely qualified to go there. Therefore, it was impossible to think that they would run amok there. In fact, it would be pretty good if they just managed to defend themselves there. Only Yi Shiwen possessed the tyrannical strength to establish illustrious prestige over there. The term low profile had perhaps never been present in Bai Jiansong's dictionary. In fact, many people used to say that Bai Jiansong would be the next Huang Wuji if given time. These 3 individuals bid farewell to Bai Jiansong, and then flew to the Ying Xian city. Ying Xian city was located in the periphery of the true martial mountain range. All the participants in the Devil World competition had gathered here. Yi Shiwen felt nostalgic as he saw the city getting closer and closer. He had returned to Ying Xian city after a few decades. He had been a nobody of half-step legendary realm back then. Decades had passed within the blink of an eye, and he wasn't the same anymore. Yi Zaiwen's current point of view allowed him to conclude that he truly was a nobody at that time. He was a person who didn't know the profoundness of this world. Ying Xian city used to remain closed for the majority of time. It would open only when True Martial University recruited new disciples. It had now opened to welcome a large number of powerful sage experts. Yi Shiwen could see tyrannical sage experts coming from afar, while treading the flying lights. And this bode true for wherever his gaze fell. The True Martial University's dreadful background could be seen just from the number of these sage experts. Moreover, these weren't all the sage experts of the True Martial University. It was just a portion of them. Many sage experts could be engaged in some other matters, or they might be aware that they couldn't reap big harvests by coming here. Therefore they hadn't arrived. Yi Shiwen watched these experts, and felt that it wasn't just luck that True Martial University had firmly obtained dominance over the entire southern region. Yi Shiwen arrived in the Yingxian city, along with the other two individuals. He then swept his gaze over the distant places around. Everyone present over here was a tyrannical sage expert. Some people recognized Yi Shiwen, and immediately began to discuss. Is this man Yi Shiwen? From what angle does he look like a sage small perfection level expert? It mustn't be true. He has the strength of sage great perfection level. The information published in the newspaper is wrong. Has he once again made a breakthrough? However, what difference does it make? After all, he has defeated the legendary Qiao Yuyu. Don't get deceived by his appearance of sage great perfection realm. How many sage great perfection level experts can defeat Qiao Yuyu? Qiao Yuyu had only recently entered the half-step great sage realm. However, even you and I can't be sure of defeating him. However, Yi Shiwen has defeated him. Does he look like a nobody? So, you're saying that you're not sure that you can defeat Yi Shiwen? Don't be absurd. We had entered half-step great sage realm nearly 100 years ago. What is he? I don't know how he has defeated Qiao Yuyu. However, we also have some undisclosed strengths of our own that we haven't revealed yet. A series of tyrannical auras swept past Yi Ziwen's body. It seemed that they wanted to see through his cultivation. These people who had dared to see through him without any hesitation were all super experts of half-step great sage realm, without exception. The core experts were in abundance just like clouds in the sky. However, all of these core experts were top-notches among the core disciples. Yi Shiwen had the success of defeating Qiao Yuyu. However, Qiao Yuyu's strength wasn't the most tyrannical among these elites. On top of that, Yi Shiwen looked just like an expert of sage great perfection realm. Therefore, these people instinctively looked down on him. A nobody of sage realm? Yi Shiwen sneered. He deliberated a bit, and then bursts of golden light emitted from his body in the surroundings. The golden lights entirely extinguished the probing divine senses that had been wandering around him. Audacious, savage, arrogant and despotic. Those disciples who had swept out their divine senses immediately shouted in anger one after another. After all, this was a provocation from Yi Shiwen. A nonentity of sage realm had dared to provoke these elite disciples of half-step great sage realm. Yi Shiwen was a heaven's pride expert. However, strength trumps everything. After all, what was the worth of a heaven's pride expert who would die at a young age? Yi Shiwen closed his eyes to regain composure, and didn't think too much about what these people were saying. These people had perhaps forgotten that sweeping one's divine sense over someone's body was also a kind of provocation. Brother Yi. Several figures suddenly descended from the sky. They were headed by none other than Gao Ling Xiao. There were also a few experts of half-step great sage realm behind her. There was another female expert in that group apart from Gao Ling Xiao. She was following Gao Ling Xiao. She was dressed in a magnificent embroidered robe. She had a tall and slender figure, and had delicate facial features. Her fair complexion contained pride. She looked just like an independent swan that had left the world behind her. Every one of them was an expert. All the other experts were at the initial stage of half-step great sage realm apart from that female expert, who was at the intermediate stage of half-step great sage realm. She was just one step away from becoming the peak expert of intermediate stage of half-step great sage realm. However, what made Yi Shiwen even more surprised was that this group was headed by Gao Ling Xiao, who was at the sage accomplished realm. She hadn't said clearly that she was leading the group. However, it looked so from the order of their lineup. This Gao Ling Xiao is not simple. Brother Yi, I wasn't mistaken in reading your potential. I was right. Gao Ling Xiao smiled and walked towards Yi Shiwen. Let me introduce these people to you. They are the fellow disciples of our Merit Palace Hall. Yi Shiwen came to know that female expert's name was Jin Yiqiu from Gao Ling Xiao's introduction. She was one of the disciples of Merit Palace Hall, and had been nurtured with care. She was also one of the Heaven's Pride experts of the previous session. She enjoyed an illustrious fame among the core disciples of the true martial university. Gao Lingxiu introduced Yi Shiwen to those disciples, and they also looked at him with a bit of curiosity. It was hard for them to imagine that Yi Shiwen was just at sage great perfection realm. How has he defeated Qiao Yuyu? Yi Shiwen immediately understood that these people had been gathered by Gao Lingxiu. These core disciples were divided into different cliques, and Gao Lingxiu was the leader of one such clique. Brother Yi, it would be better if we unite after we enter the devil world. Well, feel more confident that way. Gao Lingxiu looked at Yi Shiwen and said, these cliques must unite this time in order to tackle the dangers in this foreign world. After all, it was necessary for everyone to cooperate sincerely in an extremely dangerous place like the devil world. Everyone looked at Yi Shiwen. They were waiting for him to nod. After all, everyone apart from a few monsters must work together in the devil world. And Hidden Star Peak had only a few people in the competition this time. So they weren't in a position to form a team of their own. The members of this clique believed that Yi Shiwen deserved to join them, no matter how he had defeated Qiao Yuyu. But I have no plans to join any of the cliques. Yi Shiwen rejected the offer. This caught everyone by surprise. Chapter 601. Heavenly Punishment. Everyone was left dumbstruck. They felt as if they had misheard Yi Shiwen. Yi Shiwen has refused. Doesn't he know how dangerous the devil world is? Even these experts of half-step Great Sage Realm had formed a team since they couldn't dare to say with confidence that they would be perfectly safe in the devil world. And Yi Shiwen had refused to join them. Yi Ziwen's complexion was calm and composed. The devil world was a very dangerous place. However, it was a big treasure trove as far as Yi Shiwen was concerned since he had Yi Mo and the heavenly source mirror by his side. However, other people couldn't see this. The evil way of martial cultivation wasn't necessarily accepted by the masses. In fact, anything related to devil way was openly frowned upon. Everyone would start to clamor like street mice to show their detestation for it. Yi Shiwen didn't wish to be ostracized from the crowd. However, Yang Wenjun and Deng Shui Xian had already reached an agreement with Yi Shiwen that they would join some of their friends from the university and wouldn't stay with him during the competition. Gao Lingxiu also looked at Yi Shiwen with a bit of surprise. She hadn't anticipated that he would refuse her offer. She had put forward this offer because she had wanted to rope in Yi Shiwen. Yi Shiwen didn't get along with the law enforcement hall. However, they weren't like the law enforcement hall. And they weren't afraid of the people of Law Enforcement Hall either. Therefore, Yi Ziwen's enmity with Law Enforcement Hall didn't bother them at all. However, she stepped forward and said, we won't force you if that's the case. However, I'll still hope that Brother Yi will join us after going there. The experts who were behind Gao Lingxiu were somewhat dissatisfied with this statement of hers. After all, it seemed from this statement that she was giving too much importance to Yi Shiwen. This Yi Shiwen is extremely arrogant. He didn't agree even though we have personally invited him. Yi Shiwen nodded. This request was completely justified in his opinion. After all, he would possess the fighting prowess of Great Sage level if he summoned the Star Colossus avatar. So he was naturally qualified to take care of her. The fighting prowess of the Star Colossus avatar had also made a breakthrough into intermediate stage of Great Sage Realm from the initial stage of Great Sage Realm. This increment in strength had naturally boosted Yi Ziwen's confidence. However, the experts in Gao Lingxiu's clique believed this to be proof of Yi Ziwen's arrogance. Sound of breaking of space unceasingly came from the sky while Yi Shiwen and the others waited here. Then, a series of flying lights broke through the horizon. An increasing number of experts appeared in the sky one after another. Each one of them was a powerhouse of Sage Realm. After all, they wouldn't have participated in this time's Devil World competition if they didn't believe that they had enough strength. And that's because a place like the Devil World was very dangerous. However, the people with powerful strength didn't care about life or death. Therefore, only those people who had very much confidence in themselves had arrived. These people who had cultivated till this degree were naturally very lucky without any exception. They must be much more tyrannical than those random cultivators with no background sage experts whom Yi Shiwen had seen earlier. Those random cultivators didn't even have any heritage. They used to cultivate depending merely upon their own adventures. The experts that had arrived here would be considered as elites of Sage Realm, if each of them had been placed in the outside world. Each of them could hog up a big chunk of land. Yi Shiwen still hadn't seen the true background of the true martial university. However, he had already gotten a rough idea about it by looking at these people. Yi Shiwen hadn't even pondered any further when a group of people descended from sky, while treading the flying lights. However, they hadn't come for Yi Shiwen. They had instead come for Gao Lingxiu, who was beside him. They were headed by a youth who looked about 30 years old. He looked handsome, majestic and awe-inspiring. His every movement gave off a feeling clashing metals. Yi Shiwen shot a glance at him. He was shocked to find that this man had already entered the late stage of half-step Great Sage Realm. Moreover, he was the kind of expert who had profound martial power. In other words, he was just a small step away from the Great Sage Realm. Gao Lingxiu's voice entered into Yi Ziwen's ears while he was wondering who this man was. This man is Bai Jingwei. He has an outstanding reputation among the core disciples. He is a peak cultivator among the core disciples. He is very straightforward. He is worth making friends with. Gao Lingxiu knew that Yi Ziwen's cultivation was profound. However, his cultivation time was very short. So he perhaps didn't know much about this outstanding character among the core disciples. Therefore, she introduced this man to Yi Shiwen. Sister Gao. Bai Jingwei came straight over to Gao Lingxiu. He didn't look towards Yi Shiwen. In fact, it seemed as if he hadn't even noticed Yi Shiwen. I haven't seen Brother Bai in many years. You're just one step away from the Great Sage Realm now. So, you'll perhaps make the breakthrough within a few years. Gao Lingxiu smiled and said. She had laid bare the secrets. Yi Shiwen secretly said, Gao Lingxiu isn't ordinary. After all, it should be impossible for her to see through Bai Jingwei's cultivation as per her current strength of sage accomplished realm. Sister Gao is still as sharp as ever. Anyway, there's no comparison between me and you. Your future prospects are limitless. Bai Jingwei was looking at Gao Lingxiu with a slightly envious look in his eyes. I'll come straight to the point. I've arrived looking for Sister Gao because I want to ask whether Sister Gao is interested in collaborating this time. Those bastards of Xianyuan Palace Hall had joined with a few other forces during the last Devil World competition. They had then used underhanded techniques against the experts of our university and annihilated them. I've planned to pay them back this time. I'll get rid of those experts of Xianyuan Palace Hall. Bai Jingwei's face exposed vigorous anger as he said. He looked ferocious and aggressive. The true martial university had once dominated the southern region, and there was a possibility that it could revive once again. Therefore, it often used to face combined attacks in such competitions, and had often suffered disastrous losses therein. Bai Jiansong had mentioned these things to Yi Shiwen. Therefore, Yi Shiwen also knew about it. The top experts of the true martial university could similarly take advantage of this opportunity and kill the experts of the other forces. After all, the people of the other forces were a bigger threat than those experts of devil race inside the devil world. Bai Jingwei hadn't been as powerful as he was now at the time of the last Devil World competition. He had already reached to the peak this time. In fact, he might enter Great Sage Realm before the next Devil World competition. Therefore, he couldn't miss this opportunity, and must make the most of it. Several disciples realized this thing as he said this. Everyone seemed to be brimming with anger. Gao Lingxiu also understood everything as she heard this. However, she immediately turned towards Yi Shiwen and asked, I don't know whether Brother Yi is interested or not. Everyone looked at Yi Shiwen. The experts behind Bai Jingwei in particular looked at him somewhat curiously. Who is this man? Why is Gao Lingxiu giving so much importance to him? Gao Lingxiu was merely at the sage accomplished realm. However, it was obvious that she held an extremely high status among these people. They clearly didn't weigh her on the basis of realm. Sister Gao, who is this man? Bai Jingwei looked towards Yi Shiwen. Let me introduce him to you. This is Yi Shiwen. Brother Yi is the one who has defeated Law Enforcement Hall's Chao Yu. Gao Lingxiu replied. Everyone was left in shock. It's not surprising that Gao Lingxiu is giving so much importance to this Yi Shiwen. This must be the reason for that. Yi Shiwen, Yang Wenjun, and Deng Shui Xian had become the center of attraction among this crowd of half-step great sage experts. Thinking about it, it was expected. However, everyone became even more curious after they came to know Yi Ziwen's level. How had a sage great perfection level expert managed to defeat Chao Yu? After all, the latter had already entered half-step great sage realm at that time. However, they didn't know that Yi Shiwen had been a mere sage small perfection level expert at that time. Otherwise, they would have been even more astonished. However, they still felt that Gao Lingxiu was giving too much importance to Yi Shiwen. He had surely defeated Chao Yu. But Chao Yu had been the weakest among these half-step great sage experts. He could at most have been at the same level. Anyway, Gao Lingxiu didn't need to ask for their opinion. So it's Brother Yi. It seems that Brother Yi has become very popular these days. Bai Jingwei smiled and said. His attitude was very kind and friendly. He didn't ignore Yi Shiwen just because he was a sage expert. Therefore, Yi Shiwen formed a good opinion of this man because of this. The younger generation will surpass us in time. Our university needs several talents like you to emerge out in large numbers to ensure that it can thrive and become powerful. I can only participate in this time's Devil World competition. After that, I'll be rooting for you all. There was an expression of sincerity in Bai Jingwei's eyes. It was obvious that these weren't empty words. He truly thought so. Yi Shiwen secretly thought. There are very few people like Bai Jingwei. It's not surprising that Gao Lingxiu had said he's worth making friends with. Not at all. Yi Ziwen's face also exposed a humble smile. Our university will definitely revive if everyone in the university becomes loyal and devoted like Brother Bai. I don't know whether Brother Yi is interested in joining our group. Our chances will certainly increase enormously if Brother Yi joins us. Bai Jingwei invited Yi Shiwen. Yi Shiwen also knew that such a matter would increase his weightage in front of the high-level experts. Therefore he thought for a while, and then nodded. Just send a summon signal for me when you guys are about to start your attack on the other forces. I'll rush over no matter where I am. Excellent. That's reassuring. Bai Jingwei smiled and said. Then, I'll take my leave now. I must go and meet other people. Bai Jingwei was about to walk away. But then he suddenly turned towards Yi Shiwen and said, Brother Yi, I've heard that the Heavenly Punishment faction of Law Enforcement Hall is also participating. I hope you'll be careful and prepared in advance. Everyone was stunned by this. All of them looked towards Yi Shiwen with a bit of pity in their eyes. After all, how could a person have a good ending if they were being targeted by the Heavenly Punishment faction? Yi Shiwen was somewhat stunned. The Heavenly Punishment faction is also participating this time. Yi Shiwen also knew a bit about the Heavenly Punishment faction. This was an elite faction of the Law Enforcement Hall. Every member of this faction was an elite member in the Law Enforcement Hall. The majority of its members were at the late stage of half-step Great Sage realm. And the leader of this faction was a Great Sage expert. The Heavenly Punishment faction would usually be out chasing and killing traitors who had flown away. Or they would be involved in some other secret missions. However, they didn't participate in such competitions. Therefore Yi Shiwen hadn't expected that they would participate this time. Could it be that it's coming for me? Yi Shiwen instinctively thought of this point at once. In fact, this was very probable. And he must be careful if it was so. All the members of Heavenly Punishment faction were elites. And every individual was difficult to deal with. Chapter 602. Enters Devil World. There was a so-called saying, it's better to provoke the king of hell than to incur the heavenly punishment. These martial practitioners often used to wander between life and death. So they knew the means to save their lives. However, it would be a dead end for them if they provoked the Heavenly Punishment faction. Of course, the Heavenly Punishment faction wouldn't move into action under normal circumstances. They wouldn't do so as long as one didn't betray the university. There was no clear information on the basis of which one could say that they were directed against Yi Shiwen. Anyway, the fact that the Heavenly Punishment faction had set out wasn't good news for Yi Shiwen since he was an enemy of Law Enforcement Hall. Initially, the people that had arrived with Gao Ling Xiu were thinking that Yi Shiwen had been given too much importance by her. However, they were now looking at him with a trace of pity in their eyes. Yi Shiwen has provoked the Heavenly Punishment faction. He won't have an easy time in the future. However, Yi Shiwen didn't care too much about it. He would summon the Star Colossus avatar in the critical situation to blast the enemy away. Even the Heavenly Punishment faction wouldn't be able to do anything about that. They would look insignificant in the face of his tyrannical strength. The time allotted for the experts to gather here had passed very quickly. The entire Xian city was filled with sage experts who would participate in this time's Devil World competition. It could be said with confidence that the experts present here were in abundance. More than a dozen figures cut through the vast sky and arrived after all the experts had arrived here. Each one of them possessed incomparably formidable aura. All of them were great sages. They were headed by a man who was none other than the old city lord of Xian city, whom Yi Shiwen had seen earlier. Yi Shiwen had seen the Xian city's lord after a few decades. However, the city lord still looked as unfathomable as before. Even looking at him forever would be insufficient. Nobody knew about his origins. In fact, nobody knew since how long he had been the lord of the Xian city. They just knew that he used to appear every time the Xian city opened. Silence! The old city lord's powerful voice silenced all the experts who were present here. All of these people possessed super strength and were untamed. However, they didn't dare to act presumptuously in front of these great sages. The Devil World competition is going to take place once again. I don't need to explain how important it is for our university, the old city lord faintly said. Your leaders must have already told you everything. Therefore, I won't say much. I just hope you'll give a good performance and establish great merit. The old city lord brandished his hand, and golden lights filled the surrounding. Then those golden lights fell into everyone's body like a rain of light. Yi Shiwen could feel the golden light had fallen inside his body and gotten concealed therein. These golden lights will record the number of devils that you kill. Then, that number will be converted into points which will appear on the merit list. You'll get 1 point for killing a semi-sage devil expert. You'll get 10 points for killing a devil expert of initial stage of Sage Realm. Killing an expert of intermediate stage of Sage Realm will get you 20 points. 30 points for killing an expert of late stage of Sage Realm. 40 points for killing an expert of Sage Realm Peak. 50 points for Sage Small Perfection Level Expert. 60 points for Sage Great Perfection Level Expert. 100 points for Sage Accomplished Level Expert. 1,000 points for an expert of initial stage of half-step Great Sage Realm. 3,000 points for an expert of intermediate stage of half-step Great Sage Realm. 5,000 points for an expert of late stage of half-step Great Sage Realm. And the reward will be 10,000 points if you kill a Great Sage. The old city lord explained in his sonorous and powerful voice. Yi Shiwen got immersed into his mind after he heard this. He found a merit list in the depths of his consciousness. The list was still blank. No one's name had appeared on it yet. The names of the people of other forces wouldn't appear along with them on this list. However, their achievements and ranking would appear in the list. Therefore, it would become obvious who was strong and who was weak after having a glance at this list. Divine beams flickered on the old city lord's hands after he was done talking. He then ripped apart a huge crack in the sky with his hands. The crack was 10,000 feet wide and more than 100,000 feet long. Devil wind was howling inside the crack and blowing out from inside it. The gas that had proliferated from inside the crack made everyone feel uncomfortable. It was the devil gas which was present inside the devil world. Only Yi Shiwen wasn't feeling uncomfortable. The entire devil gas that entered Yi Ziwen's body had been absorbed by the heavenly source mirror and transformed into devil energy which supplemented Yi Ziwen's energy requirements. He could also make the mysterious space absorb it. It could be said that the devil energy was no big deal for Yi Shiwen. However, the same couldn't be said for the other people. The devil race was the only species who could adapt to the devil energy. Even the fiercest demon beasts apart from that of the devil race couldn't endure direct exposure to the devil energy. Yi Shiwen, the old city lord, possesses incomparably profound martial power. Yi Mo suddenly said. He has effortlessly torn open a passage that leads to the devil world. Such cultivation is shocking. Yi Shiwen nodded. He might not be able to tear open such a passage even with the Star Colossus Avatar's assistance. In fact, it was simply impossible for him. Moreover, the power of the space principle was second only to the power of the great principle of time. An ordinary person could break the space of the weakest region. However, that would merely happen for a split second. Afterwards, the space would be restored by the space principle. The cultivation of a person that could open such a crack for such a long time would be enough to scare a person to death. Yi Shiwen could see the mountains and rivers inside the devil world through that huge crack. This scene was similar to what he had seen in the microcosm of Yuan School, which had been formed from the fragments of devil world. There were boundless black clouds and howling and billowing winds. Terrifying energies were boiling therein. This was the devil world. Even the old experts who had participated many times in the devil world competition became scared as they saw this scene. Only the people who had formed a team could survive in such a dangerous place. Yi Shiwen sniffed the fatal aura that was coming out from inside the crack. The devil world competition had turned out to be a huge test every time. Yi Mo was somewhat eager to give it a try. After all, the devil world was his home. It could be said that he would be back in his home once Yi Shiwen had entered the devil world. Yi Mo could obviously display far more power in the devil world. Go. Countless sage experts flew inside the devil world. It was a spectacular scene. Each one of them soared to the sky. It seemed as if they had been swept up by a tyrannical energy column. Each of them transformed into a streamer of light, and went inside. No one was left by Yi Ziwen's side at this time. Yang Wenjun and Deng Shui Xian had already left to find the team that they had previously agreed to go with. Gao Lingxiu had also crashed into the passage along with the other people. Let's go. Yi Shiwen said. And a pair of golden wings unfolded behind his body. He then transformed into a golden light, and burst into the passage. Yi Shiwen had just entered the passage when he felt boundless devil energy blowing against his face. He saw devil clouds surging about as far as he could see. Countless devils were hidden inside these devil clouds. Fufu. These stupid humans have arrived to throw away their lives as expected. This is a banquet of blood and flesh. Each of these individuals is elite among the humans. Therefore, they possess extremely exuberant vitality. Our cultivation will advance enormously after we've swallowed them alive. We may also reach up to the great sage realm, if we manage to swallow a bunch of them. Yi Ziwen's expression turned cold. He hadn't expected that he would come across an ambush immediately after he entered the devil world. However, the individuals in the devil world weren't idiots. They knew that the experts of true martial world would enter the devil world in order to kill them. So, they had taken advantage of this opportunity and set up an ambush in order to eliminate all these people in one fell swoop. The sage experts who had just entered the devil world began to attack one after another in order to deal with these devils. Yi Shiwen looked around. These devils were large in number. Fortunately, there wasn't any extremely tyrannical devil expert to assume personal command among them. Otherwise, the true martial university's experts might have suffered heavy losses. These devils are very cunning. Yi Shiwen coldly snorted. Hundreds of semi-sage devils had already arrived in front of him. These devils were common in the devil world. A semi-sage expert couldn't be considered as a nonentity in the true martial world. They also had an appropriate position. However, a semi-sage expert was nothing inside these ambushing forces of the devil world. They were simply servants of the lowest rank. The devil world's strength was evident from this point. According to Yi Mo, the devil world had an outstanding reputation in the past. It was among the few famous macrocosms. It was simply impossible for the true martial world to contend against the devil world. The true martial world wouldn't have been able to stop the devil world if it had revealed its real strength. Both worlds were simply not on the same level. Yi Shiwen stretched out his hand to grasp. It exploded into endless rays of light in the sky. Those rays of light then formed a huge net and grabbed those hundreds of devils. The experts of devil race that came in contact with those rays of light screamed one after another. They got exploded and transformed into blood fog. Thereafter, they got absorbed by the heavenly source mirror. The heavenly source mirror emitted bursts of scarlet light from inside Yi Ziwen's body. It could be said that the blood essence present inside these devils was a big supplement for the heavenly source mirror. Haha. The blood essence of the devils is the biggest supplement. There will be no need to look for a great sage tool if it continues like this. The heavenly source mirror itself can evolve and become a great sage tool. Yi Mo laughed wildly and said, the natural instincts of the devils made them suppressed in front of Yi Shiwen. The devil energy present inside these devils' bodies was transformed into spirit energies, and this was then absorbed by Yi Shiwen. This immediately replenished Yi Ziwen's used-up real elemental energy. No one in the devil world could absorb the devil energy from the atmosphere. Apart from the devils, or those people of devil worship cult who had cultivated devil cultivation methods. It could be said that one's own real elemental energy wasn't enough in a place like this. It was necessary to have a lot of primary spirit dawn or other such heavenly treasures that could replenish one's real elemental energy. Otherwise, one would die in the devil world because of shortage of real elemental energy. Therefore, no one dared to use their real elemental energy extravagantly inside the devil world. They couldn't use it freely here like they used to do everywhere else. Basically, they must use it as less as possible. However, Yi Shiwen had a big advantage in this aspect. After all, he could spend his real elemental energy without any hesitation. So he wouldn't die because of exhaustion of real elemental energy like other people. Yi Shiwen looked as far as his eyes could see. He saw thousands and thousands of disciples of True Martial University attacking the devils. Sounds of shouting and killing reverberated everywhere. These people also deserve to be called as elites in the True Martial University. They were facing experts of devil race that were twice as many as them, but were still fighting them with all of their strength. Yi Shiwen looked at the merit list. He found that his name was at the bottom behind 50,000 names. He had obtained only 100 points till now. He could only be considered at the bottom of the bottom. He then shot a glance at the top of the list. He saw that someone had obtained 3,000 points. Moreover, the disciples of the True Martial University weren't the only ones present there. The experts of the various forces had scattered in different areas in the devil world. However, an intense collision between them was imminent. Chapter 603. Kills in all directions. All these people were the elites among the elites of various forces. And these elites were slaughtering at a very fast speed. The experts of devil race had cleverly planned an ambush in order to catch the disciples of the True Martial University off guard. However, they hadn't been able to withstand them for a long time, and had soon been forced to retreat little by little in defeat. The experts of the True Martial University attacked one after another. A large group of devils got defeated in the first attack. Yi Shiwen could see that the scores on the merit list were increasing frantically. Yi Shiwen obviously couldn't just sit back and watch other people fighting and killing. So, he also went all out. However, he hadn't killed much when those devils who had been running rampant just a moment ago got wiped out completely. Not a single one was left. Yi Shiwen had obtained merely around 200 points in the first round of the clash. That's because the ones that he had killed were merely the unorganized semi-sage devils. However, he was in no hurry. This is just the beginning. I'll let the others run rampant. I'll just get hold of a great sage-level devil and kill him to leave everyone in the dust. There had been a huge crowd at the entrance of the devil world not too long ago. However, there wasn't anyone here now. Most of the experts had already flown towards the depths of this world. Yi Ziwen's face exposed a trace of smile. After all, this place was his home ground. Yi Shiwen flew into the sky of the devil world. He felt as if a sword was scraping off his body as bursts of devil wind brushed against him. The fact was that the astral wind of the true martial world was nothing in comparison to the devil wind of the devil world. The astral wind was just like a breeze in comparison. They were entirely different. The living environment of the devil world was very nasty. Therefore, its inhabitants, the devil, were far more sturdy than the humans. Human. A big hand suddenly swept over from the sky. The claw immediately grabbed and smashed the void. It seemed as if it would definitely grab and kill Yi Shiwen. It was clear from the aura being emitted from this big hand that it was a devil beast of sage accomplished realm. It had been hiding inside the devil clouds and had planned to kill Yi Shiwen with a single fatal blow. However, Yi Shiwen didn't even look at it. Endless rays of light emitted from his palms and proliferated in the surroundings in an instant. The entire sky suddenly got illuminated by these rays of light. Then the devil clouds burst open, and a devil beast screamed as it got killed. It couldn't even injure Yi Shiwen. Then, its blood essence got entirely absorbed by the heavenly source mirror. Consequently, Yi Shiwen could feel that the heavenly source mirror had become a bit stronger once again. He had killed this beast. However, it didn't mean that other devil beasts wouldn't attack him. On the contrary, an increasing number of beasts appeared in the surroundings. They weren't real devils. Instead, they were the devil beasts that had just been living inside the devil world. They were locally born and bred in the devil world. They were similar to the demon beasts born in the true martial world. It was just that these beasts used to feed on the devil energy. The real members of devil race were as civilized as humans. They even had their own countries and cities. Moreover, they also had a devil army. They were very dreadful. The devil beasts here were nothing in comparison to them. The humans had the dominance in the true martial world. Similarly, the devil race dominated the devil world. Yi Mo had already made Yi Shiwen aware of these things. Yi Mo was an old monster whose age couldn't be predicted. It could be said that he knew these things inside out. Several demon beasts of Sage Realm had already gathered in the surroundings. They had been attracted by the fluctuations caused by the battle at this place. Their speed was extremely quick. It was far beyond the imagination of an ordinary person. They were several times more dangerous than the demon beasts present in the true martial world. These demon beasts were just ordinary beasts of Sage Realm, and one couldn't get too many points by killing them. However, they were huge in quantity, so it was much easier to find them as compared to the devil beasts of half-step Great Sage Realm. Inverting Ocean Seal. Yi Shiwen formed a hand seal. Then, the inverting ocean seal surged through the sky, and overwhelmingly fell down in torrents. Those devil beasts who had been approaching whilst issuing bizarre screams couldn't resist such an attack. They immediately got annihilated, and reduced to bits. After that, Yi Shiwen once again checked his points. He found that he had suddenly gained several hundred points. Consequently, his ranking had also increased all of a sudden. It had reached the 10,000s. However, it was still useless as more than 10,000 people were still ahead of him, and more than 100,000 people were chasing him. Moreover, he would slide down hundreds and hundreds of names if he showed even a bit of laziness. However, he still wasn't in a hurry. It was just that this was the most intense time. There wouldn't be so much chaos once the rankings got stabilized. Those devils are very dangerous. However, this naturally applies only to the other people. They are simply nothing for you. Yi Mo said. The heavenly source mirror itself is the divine tool of the devil race's great monarch. So, it's naturally a bane for those of devil race. In fact, you're the next generation king of the devil race as long as you have the heavenly source mirror. And they're just like your slaves. Yi Mo was very excited after having returned to the devil world. The devils were just like a group of slaves for him. They were simply nothing. Yi Shiwen nodded. It wasn't wrong to say that the devil world was like his home ground. After all, the heavenly source mirror could restrain the powers of the devils. He could currently contend against an expert of intermediate stage of half-step Great Sage Realm among the human experts if he pushed it. However, he didn't need to be worried even if he came across an expert of late stage of half-step Great Sage Realm, as far as the experts of the devil race were concerned. Yi Shiwen continued to fly into the depths of the devil world whilst slaughtering. The more he penetrated into the depths of the devil world, the more devil experts he came across, and the more wantonly he killed. He had killed dozens or even hundreds of semi-sage experts of devil race so far. These areas should be the outskirts of the devil world. Many tyrannical devil beasts are lurking here. Even the experts of devil race may not be too willing to come to this kind of place. Generally, only the juniors of the devil race come here to hone their skills. It's true that many tyrannical devil beasts are lurking here. However, they aren't concentrated enough to be worried about. You must catch up with those people. Killing devil beasts isn't beneficial, Yemo suggested. After all, Devil World was his place. It was like he had come back to his home after he had come to the Devil World. Yi Shiwen flew further into the depths whilst Yemo spoke. Yi Shiwen didn't need to conceal the devil energy within his devil wings this time. He found that his speed had increased by 1/3 after the cloak of his divinities got removed from his wings. His devil wings were giving a great performance in the Devil World. So, it could be said that they too had returned to their home. Some of the movements that had been quite difficult to make in the true martial world had become very easy here. Suddenly, a group of great devil soldiers arrived from afar whilst flapping their bat wings behind their bodies. Their eyes shone as they saw Yi Shiwen coming from the front. A bloodlight flashed in their eyes. It seemed as if they considered Yi Shiwen as a blood and flesh cuisine. Yi Shiwen saw that these great devil soldiers had worn armors and were holding iron spears in their hands. They looked like trained soldiers. Each one of them was a powerful great devil of Sage Realm. They were headed by a young leader, who turned out to be an expert of initial stage of half-step Great Sage Realm. They weren't like those scattered devil beasts on the outskirts. Yi Shiwen recalled what Yemo had told him earlier. This great devil clan was also one of the 8 noble clans of the devil race. Their population was huge. It was the largest among the 8 noble clans. People would visualize them whenever they thought of the devil race. The great devils had a huge population, so they were often used as the main force as well as cannon fodder among all the devil armies of devil race that went on expedition in other worlds. Consequently, every world had legends about the great devils. These great devil soldiers were just patrolling. However, they were already at the Sage Realm. After all, experts below Sage Realm didn't have any status in the devil world. They were just considered as commoners and slaves. Yi Shiwen hadn't thought much when those great devil soldiers suddenly attacked him. All of them were well-trained soldiers, so they were moving in a battle formation. They were merely at the Sage Realm. However, they could display the fighting prowess of half-step Great Sage level if they fought together. Therefore, people didn't underestimate them. The young squad leader of these great devils rushed straight over. Then his claws swept out in rhythm. This was an incredible martial art. He was just a patrol leader in the devil army. However, he would be considered as an elite if placed in the true martial world. In fact, he could even be ranked among the core disciples. You're a courageous human. You're just at the Sage Great Perfection realm. But, you've still dared to penetrate deep into the devil world. Fufu. You don't know the profoundness of the world. You can only become my meal. That great devil squad leader looked exceptionally sinister as he opened his mouth wide like a sacrificial bowl. Those great devil soldiers also arrived fluttering their bat wings behind him. They were moving in accordance with their leader, and had a very good coordination with him. They spread across like a huge net, and advanced towards Yi Shiwen to capture him. Yi Shiwen sneered. These great devil soldiers are treating me as an ordinary expert. They've dared to jump in front of me. They're courting death. Yi Ziwen's big hands suddenly stretched out with the vigor of a dragon and the ferocity of a tiger. It was the Control Crane 7 divine hands. The people of the law enforcement hall might have been scared to death if they had seen it. After all, this was Mu Shengjie's technique. And it had appeared in Yi Ziwen's hand now. Yi Shiwen obviously wasn't as proficient in this technique as Mu Shengjie was. In fact, there might even be some flaws in his technique. However, this didn't stop him from using the Control Crane 7 divine hands on that young great devil leader. Bang! 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 Yi Shiwen and the great devil leader exchanged 100 blows in an instant. Ah! The young great devil leader screamed as both of his hands got exploded and transformed into a mass of blood fog. Then, that blood fog got absorbed by the heavenly source mirror. How is this possible? You're just a human. The eyes of the young great devil leader opened wide. He looked at Yi Shiwen incredulously. He couldn't believe this. The great devil clan wasn't known for their physiques, and they couldn't even be compared with the people of Azura clan who had tank-like bodies. However, their bodies must still be much stronger than those of the human experts. It wasn't that the young great devil leader hadn't killed any outstanding human experts. He had killed a few senior human experts in the previous Devil World competition, and his martial power had increased significantly after he had swallowed their blood essence. He had then smoothly made the breakthrough into half-step Great Sage realm. He had gotten to know the benefits of harvesting human experts. Therefore, he had hurriedly carried his soldiers and arrived to intercept the human experts after the Devil World competition had started this time. He had thought that he could once again reap big benefits. However, who could have imagined that he would come across Yi Shiwen, a god of death? Yi Shiwen sneered, and suddenly attacked once again with the Control Crane's 7 divine hands. Bang! The young great devil leader screamed as he got slapped to death. The heavenly source mirror emitted bursts of scarlet luster from inside Yi Shiwen's body. The vitality of that young great devil leader got absorbed and left nothing behind. It then transformed into the real elemental energy. This was the primary source of Yi Shiwen's energy. Finally, the real elemental energy entered into Yi Shiwen's body and got assimilated by him, and his blood essence got entirely absorbed by the heavenly source mirror. Chapter 604. Magic Crystal Ore Deposits. Become rich overnight. The Great Devil Squad leader's idea of taking cheap advantage wasn't wrong. After all, it would have been a dead end for an ordinary expert of Sage Great Perfection realm if they had come across him. They wouldn't have had any chance of survival. However, he had unfortunately messed with a freak like Yi Shiwen. He didn't have the power to fight back in front of Yi Shiwen, even though he was an expert of initial stage of half-step Great Sage realm. He wouldn't have been a match for Yi Shiwen even if Yi Shiwen hadn't made the breakthrough a year ago, let alone now when Yi Shiwen had already made the breakthrough. It became impossible for those other great devil soldiers to contend against Yi Shiwen after their young leader got killed. All of them got killed by Yi Shiwen in a moment's effort. It was simply impossible for them to be a match for him. Yi Shiwen came across a few more squads soon after that. Such squads were commonly seen in the Devil World. The true martial world considered this Devil World competition as an opportunity to hone their disciples. So, how could the devil race not have thought so as well? Especially when many devils had tasted success in previous trials. The martial power of these devils would skyrocket after they devoured these elite human experts. Therefore, many devils had responded instantly. They didn't even need to be summoned. They had arrived one after another of their own accord. However, they had unfortunately become Yi Shiwen's supplement now. Yi Shiwen had the assistance of the heavenly source mirror, so these devils could only become his slaves. Yi Shiwen could obtain whatever he wanted from them. This would save Yi Shiwen the penance of innumerable years of cultivation. Yi Shiwen had killed a few devils of half-step Great Sage realm and absorbed the devil energy of their bodies. Consequently, his slightly unstable cultivation of Sage Great Perfection realm had become stable. Other people feared the devil energy. They tried to avoid it. However, it was like a tonic for Yi Shiwen. Naturally, the deeper he penetrated into the devil world, the more powerful devils he came across. Several days passed. Yi Shiwen finally came across the people of other forces. They were also experts like him. There would be no problem if one met the experts of other forces with whom they had a friendly relation. However, a fight would break out on the spot if the relation between them wasn't good. After all, it didn't matter who died in this place since the high-level experts wouldn't investigate about it. The high-level experts of every big force hoped that their disciples could display invincible might and establish great prestige of their respective forces. However, they had also mutually agreed that they wouldn't inquire about the life or death of the participants in this trial. There weren't many forces that had good relations with the true martial university. In fact, the majority of them were sworn enemies of the true martial university. It wasn't known how many predecessors had died on both sides during the decline of the true martial university. So, it could be said that their enmity was as deep as the ocean. Some people didn't have good eyes. After all, they had set out towards Yi Shiwen. They considered him just an ordinary expert of sage great perfection realm. Therefore, they had collaborated to deal with him. However, Yi Shiwen wasn't merciful either. So, anyone who attacked him got slaughtered. The ranking on the merit list had become stable along with the passage of time. The top 100 positions belonged to the powerful experts of the late stage of half-step great sage realm. The top 50 positions belonged to the well-known figures among those experts. And the top 20 positions belonged to those experts who had the reputation of being able to escape from the hands of experts of initial stage of great sage realm. One could make out the strong and weak people from the merit list. It mightn't be accurate. But those who had acquired the top 100 positions were undoubtedly extremely tyrannical people. Yi Shiwen had killed for several days, and he could also be considered as hardworking. However, the rankings showed that he was extremely far from others. He wasn't even ranked among the top 1,000 people. He had merely broken into the top 10,000 people. He was presently a nonentity in this competition. The sky turned dark on Yi Zaiwen's 5th day in the Devil World. Strange yelling sounds came from the black clouds. The sound was ear-piercing sharp. One could tell that they were calf-sized owls by taking a closer look. These owls were considered as a weak devil species in other worlds. However, each one of them had a cultivation of semi-sage level in the Devil World. In fact, there were also many sage-level owls among them. These sage-level owls were leading the group. It would have been a dead end for even a top-notch expert of late stage of half-step great sage realm, if they had come across such a massive flock of owls. In fact, they wouldn't have dared to mess with them. However, this wasn't because these owls were extremely powerful. Instead, it was because their number was way too much. They were simply endless. However, a figure was shuttling inside this group of owls, and a golden light was flashing again and again. A large chunk of owls got killed by this golden light every time it flashed. Yi Zaiwen's expression was solemn and stern, and his hand was moving continuously. He unceasingly bombarded all kinds of martial arts techniques on a whim. It could be said that he was casually butchering them. In fact, it had become impossible for those owls to approach Yi Zaiwen's body. They couldn't even reach close to his body, and got killed by the divinities that were protecting it. Everything that was related to the devils was born from the darkest, most sinister, and most negative energy of the world. However, Yi Zaiwen's divinities had been extracted from the descendants of gods. Therefore, these divinities were the brightest, most honest, and most positive yang energy. These divinities were simply a bane for these devils. Moreover, their cultivation level was far more inferior to that of Yi Shiwen. Therefore, it was impossible for them to even approach his body. The flesh of these owls got absorbed by the heavenly source mirror after they got killed by Yi Shiwen. Yi Shiwen could feel that the heavenly source mirror wasn't far from making a breakthrough. It differed by just a foot from becoming a great sage tool. However, this separation of 1 foot in heavenly source mirror's promotion was as massive as a moat before one's eyes. Still, this was good enough. After all, an ordinary sage tool usually didn't get an opportunity to evolve into a great sage tool. This was why even some great sages were still using sage tools. Yi Shiwen simply didn't give importance to these owls, even though many experts feared them. He had been killing them casually. He could instantly absorb this rich devil energy at any time to replenish his real elemental energy. Therefore, it was impossible to think that he would die because of exhausting his real elemental energy. So it could be said that the thing that other people were avoiding was simply nothing for him. In fact, he was taking advantage of these owls to hone his martial arts since they couldn't injure him. Yi Shiwen reduced the myriads of owls into a small group in a day's time. One couldn't make out from afar, but he had indeed killed a terrifying number of owls. Countless sage experts were unceasingly flying across at a distant place. They were streaking across the sky just like a group of lights. It was the Devil World. However, how could Yi Shiwen not have become excited when he looked at these experts? These people must be more dangerous than the devils. Where are these people going? Yi Shiwen became somewhat curious after he noticed that all these experts were flying in the same direction. Therefore, he decided to end using these owls to train, and quickly followed them. He then saw that several hundred experts had gathered in a mountain range. The voices of several experts came from the surrounding. Does this place truly have magic crystal or deposits? This news can't be fake. It has already created a big commotion. It's not clear how many experts have already arrived here. Haha. Haha, then it's awesome. We'll become very rich if we can obtain just one magic crystal or deposit. After all, we can convert it into spirit stone or deposits after we return. We can become rich in one fell swoop if we obtain even one such ore. Yeah. Half of it may get acquired by the university after conversion. However, the rest would be ours, and that would also be a big profit. Where can one get such a good opportunity in the true martial world? After all those spirit stone or deposits have already been divided by the big forces amongst themselves. So, there's no way that we're going to obtain them. Yi Shiwen was startled. So they've arrived here for the magic crystal or deposits. Ordinary martial cultivators depended on spirit stones in the true martial world. And the spirit stones were usually extracted from the spirit stone or deposits. The cultivators of devil race in the devil world were dependent upon the magic crystals for their cultivation. And these magic crystals were extracted from the magic crystal or deposits. These magic crystals could also be converted into spirit stones with the help of some methods. Just like Yi Shiwen could convert the devil energy with the help of heavenly source mirror. In fact, every big force had similar methods for converting magic crystals into spirit stones. It was just that they could only achieve it with the help of large-scale matrix formations. They couldn't accomplish it alone like Yi Shiwen could. The spirit stones weren't considered as very valuable. However, they could become precious if the amount was huge. For example, one miniature spirit stone or deposit could be worth as much as 100 million primary spirit dawn. Yi Ziwen's eyes shone as he heard this. He had already obtained one. 7 billion primary spirit dawn after he had sold his heavenly treasures as well as seized 700 million primary spirit dawn from young master Jin Xiao. However, he had already consumed 500 million primary spirit dawn from that kitty when he had made the breakthrough into the sage great perfection realm. The remaining 2 billion primary spirit dawn might seem like a big amount. However, it was far from enough as far as Yi Shiwen was concerned. The Star Colossus avatar had restored its fighting prowess to the intermediate stage of Great Sage Realm. Consequently, its consumption of primary spirit dawn had reached to an astronomical figure. It would consume at least 500 million primary spirit dawn for fighting just once. Therefore 2 billion primary spirit dawn could only support it to fight twice. That's why it could be said that Yi Ziwen's stock of primary spirit dawn was far from enough. The Blood Slave had already integrated into the Star Colossus avatar, and it would completely replace the Star Colossus soul one day in the future. There wouldn't be any need to consume such huge amount of primary spirit dawn in order to make the Star Colossus set out after the Blood Slave, completely merged with the Star Colossus body, and gained enormous strength. However, Yi Shiwen believed that it was still worth it. After all, it would have been impossible for him to control the Star Colossus avatar if he didn't have the Blood Slave. This trump card of his was bound to be not so easy to use. So, how could he not have become excited on seeing the magic crystal or deposits in front of him? Other people would need to take these ores to their respective sects in order to convert them into spirit stones. However, Yi Shiwen could absorb them directly. This would obviously spare him the needless troubles. The entire mountain range was already under a barrage of attacks by the time Yi Shiwen arrived. Several experts were displaying their remarkable skills. All kinds of martial arts moves were fiercely exploding in the sky. Bang! The entire mountain suddenly exploded, and chunks of magic crystal or deposits splashed out. However, 3 huge magic crystal or deposits also flew out along with these chunks. These 3 huge magic crystal or deposits would be considered as miniature magic crystal or deposits. However, that was in comparison to the other larger magic crystal or deposits. The fact was that these 3 were of the size of a small hill. They were extremely huge. Everyone's eyes suddenly popped out with greed. In fact, nobody even looked towards those chunks of magic crystal or deposits. It must be said that those chunks of magic crystal or deposits were also quite valuable. However, how could they be compared with those 3 miniature magic crystal or deposits? Even one of those 3 miniature magic crystal or deposits was worth 100 million primary spirit dawn. And this amount of money could be compared to the wealth of a common great sage expert. So, one could become rich overnight. They could rise above their competitors if they obtained even one such or deposit. Consequently, their chances of advancing to the great sage realm would also start to look promising. These people generally couldn't obtain such or deposits. That's because they would be seized either by the major forces or by the great sages. In fact, these people wouldn't even get a chance to have a look at it. Yi Shiwen saw that countless big hands made of spirit energies had extended towards those 3 magic crystal or deposits in the sky in order to grab them. However, he still wasn't in any hurry. He first went to grab those chunks of magic crystal or deposits that had exploded out. Those chunks of magic crystal or deposits were far inferior to those hill-sized deposits of magic crystal or deposits when considered in their individual value. However, they seemed quite valuable when their large quantity was taken into account. Chapter 605. There's an ambush. A few other experts had the same idea that Yi Shiwen had. However, how could they be a match for him? Those chunks of magic crystal or deposits were grabbed by Yi Ziwen's big hand in a moment's effort. Yi Shiwen counted. It wasn't much. However, he had still collected at least 30 million primary spirit dawn worth of or deposits. It must be said that Yi Shiwen had an all-are-welcome approach regarding these things. However, the scene still became chaotic. Boy, you're courting death. Hand over those magic crystal or deposits. More than a dozen sage experts surrounded Yi Shiwen not long after. They had the same idea as Yi Shiwen had. All of them had thought of taking advantage of this opportunity and taking away these magic crystal or deposits. These deposits weren't as valuable as those 3 miniature magic crystal or deposits. However, they were still enough to make them rich overnight. They were headed by an expert of sage accomplished realm. This man also had 2 sage great perfection level experts by his side. The rest of the experts were at sage small perfection level. So this team had tyrannical strength. That was why they had dared to think about this matter. However, they hadn't even set out when all the chunks of the magic crystal or deposits got snatched away by Yi Shiwen. It must be said that Yi Ziwen's speed was extremely fast. These experts had been fascinated by the huge wealth that they could have made from those magic crystal or deposits. Therefore, they hadn't paid attention when Yi Shiwen had displayed his super speed and obtained those scattered chunks of magic crystal or deposits. These experts didn't even wait for Yi Ziwen's reply after they gave him a warning. They attacked immediately. The surrounding air exploded just like firecrackers. It got exploded by them just like magma. That head expert of sage accomplished realm attacked with full confidence. After all, he believed that Yi Shiwen was just an ordinary sage great perfection level expert. Therefore, he felt that it was impossible for Yi Shiwen to turn out to be a match for him. A spear streaked across the vast sky just like a dragon, and instantly arrived in front of Yi Shiwen. That expert of sage accomplished level expert laughed when he found that Yi Shiwen hadn't even responded. That's because he felt that he would bring down Yi Shiwen with just one spear attack. Therefore, his laughter was particularly sinister. However, Yi Shiwen finally responded in that crucial moment. The golden light flashed. His big hand transformed into a sword and went up to tackle the incoming spear. Clang! A loud metal clanging sound was heard. It shook all directions just like the pitch of a big bell. The sound waves produced by it projected out just like arrows. The scene looked incomparably dreadful. Ah, that expert of sage accomplished realm screamed. Both of his hands had been exploded by the tremendous force and transformed into a mass of blood fog. The fragments of his bones swirled in the air. The spear also shattered into pieces even though it was a sage tool. It had certainly looked like an incomparably strong sage tool. However, it had broken down into pieces just like crumbled paper under just one strike from Yi Shiwen. Then Yi Shiwen lifted his leg and kicked that expert of sage accomplished realm on the middle of his chest. A loud crunch sound was heard, and all the bones of that expert got crushed. Simultaneously, his body transformed into a streamer of light and was sent flying like a kite with broken string. His body eventually broke into the sky over the group of mountains. However, this was place wherein a fierce struggle was going on between the top experts. Bang! It wasn't clear which half-step great sage expert had attacked that sage accomplished realm expert. However, that sage accomplished realm expert had been grasped and transformed into a mass of blood fog. Consequently, those sage experts who had been planning to attack Yi Shiwen suddenly froze. They stood in the sky in a daze. They were dumbstruck. The situation had looked good a few moments ago. However, it had reversed within a snap of a finger. Their leader of sage accomplished realm had been sent out flying and then killed by someone. They were left dumbstruck. There was no way they would rush over in the present situation. After all, wouldn't that be courting death? They quickly dispersed like frightened animals. After all, they had arrived here to become wealthy, not to throw away their lives. Yi Shiwen also didn't want to kill each one of them unnecessarily. So he entered the battle for those 3 miniature magic crystal or deposits instead. Those 3 huge magic crystal or deposits emitted bursts of devil energy in the sky. Several experts had been avoiding the devil energy initially. However, they looked very comfortable with it at this time. After all, they had gotten an opportunity to possess huge wealth now. The several experts had been unceasingly fighting with each other. Meanwhile, the 3 magic crystal or deposits were still floating in the sky. Nobody had seized them yet. After all, anyone who would try to set out would have to face the surprise raids of several other experts. Yi Shiwen shot a glance and realized that the current situation at the battlefield was very intense. The ordinary sage experts didn't dare to even go close to the battlefield. After all, only the top experts of half-step Great Sage Realm were participating in this contest. 3 experts among this lot were in the intermediate stage of half-step Great Sage Realm, and the remaining 8 experts belonged to the initial stage of half-step Great Sage Realm. All of them were extremely tyrannical. An ordinary person obviously couldn't contend against them. Yi Shiwen didn't care too much about those experts of initial stage of half-step Great Sage Realm. His focus was on those 3 experts of intermediate stage of half-step Great Sage Realm. One among those 3 experts was a gray-haired old man. He was baby-faced. The second one was a middle-aged expert. And the last one was an unusually seductive woman. Let's do it like this. We are 3 people. So let's divide these 3 magic crystal or deposits. 1 for each of us. There's no need to struggle. That middle-aged expert of intermediate stage of half-step Great Sage Realm said. All those 3 individuals shot a glance at each other. There will be no need to fight if each of us got a magic crystal or deposit. Moreover, it would eliminate the possibility of someone arbitrarily entering the contest and snatching away these ores from under our noses. Therefore, this is the best way. The other 2 experts also thought about it. There are so many people. So, it's obviously impossible for a single person to keep all 3 magic crystal or deposits. However, these 8 experts of the initial stage of half-step Great Sage Realm won't be a match for the 3 of us. They wouldn't be able to do anything even if they will be dissatisfied with the fact that 3 of us took all the magic crystal or deposits. The 8 experts of initial stage of half-step Great Sage Realm became very unhappy. They had also gone through a massacre. So, why shouldn't they get any benefits? Why should everything fall into the hands of these 3 individuals? However, they also knew that these 3 individuals' strength was far above theirs. And they might not be a match for these 3 individuals even if the 8 of them fought together. However, they became unwilling to give up when they realized that the opportunity that could make them rich overnight was about to go out of their hands. 100 million primary spirit dawn might only be the icing on the cake for Yi Shiwen. However, it was an astronomical wealth for these experts. Let's fight. Why should the magic crystal or deposits only be theirs? A senior expert of initial stage of half-step Great Sage Realm resentfully said. Then, his big hand made of energy stretched out and went towards one of the magic crystal or deposits to grab it. However, he heard 3 loud shouts before he could grab those 3 magic crystal or deposits. Then 3 big hands fell down on him. This expert of initial stage of half-step Great Sage Realm had seemed awe-inspiring until now. However, he got blasted away with ease, and his body nearly exploded as a result. The gap between the initial stage of half-step Great Sage Realm and the intermediate stage of half-step Great Sage Realm was already quite big. However, there were 3 intermediate stage experts against 1 initial stage expert in this situation. Therefore, that expert of initial stage of half-step Great Sage Realm had nearly gotten exploded in just 1 strike. Those few experts of initial stage of half-step Great Sage Realm had been prepared to jump into the fight. However, they got deterred by this event. They had thought that they might be able to win by taking advantage of all the chaos. However, that had feeling died out. It had become clear to them that these 3 experts of intermediate stage of half-step Great Sage Realm wouldn't let them win by taking advantage of the chaos. He was overreaching himself. That middle-aged expert of intermediate stage of half-step Great Sage Realm coldly snorted. Then he said in a somewhat disdainful manner, "Whoosh!" A burst of howling devil wind blew from afar. Then dozens of streamers of light descended from the sky. The expressions of these human experts drastically changed when they noticed that the weakest among these streamers of light were the experts of initial stage of half-step Great Sage Realm. In fact, there was no shortage of top experts of late stage of half-step Great Sage Realm among them. However, the most important thing was that these weren't the auras of humans. They were emitting the devil energy of the devil race. This is bad. It's a surprise attack of the devils. That baby-faced expert's complexion changed. The devil world wasn't their territory, so they were mostly afraid of coming across an ambush of devils in the devil world. And that's because it would be nearly impossible for them to escape if that happened. It would be a dead end for them. Therefore, these experts preferred to act in groups. After all, this was the only way they could escape if they got surrounded by the devils in the devil world. They absolutely wouldn't be able to escape alone. They had already released their divine senses when they had been fighting here, and there hadn't been any sign of unusual movements within the radius of 1,000 miles. That's why they had been fighting on such a grand scale. However, they hadn't expected that these devils would arrive in the blink of an eye. This ambush couldn't be compared with the heavy ambush that Yi Shiwen had come across earlier. However, these dozens of devils were certainly a bigger threat than those troops. And that's because each of these devils was an elite in the devil race. These devil clansmen had arrived in front of everyone in an instant. A young devil expert suddenly dropped from the clouds while carrying a stunning aura. He was the leader of this group. His entire body was covered with layer upon layer of scales. Also, a pair of giant flesh wings could be seen behind his body. He looked quite sinister as a result. These devils looked a bit similar to the great devils. The great devils. However, their auras had countless times more grandeur than those great devils. It seemed as if the traits of all the devils whom Yi Shiwen had seen up until now could be found on the bodies of these devils. Yi Shiwen suddenly remembered what Emo had mentioned to him once. This was one of the 8 noble clans of the devil world, original devil clan. This was the original devil clan of the devil race. They were the source of all the devils if the rumors about them were to be believed. All the devils had split up from the original devils. The original devil clan had always been the first ancestors of the entire devil race. They were considered as very arrogant. After all of the devils had originated from the original devil clan. No wonder why Yi Shiwen felt as if he could sense the reflections of all other devil clans on the bodies of these devils. There was a period of time back in the day when Yi Mo had been encouraging Yi Shiwen to enter the devil world. Yi Mo had vowed that he would cultivate Yi Shiwen as the next devil king and lead the devil world to conquer all of the 10,000 worlds. Yi Shiwen hadn't agreed, but he had come to know about many matters of the devil world from Yi Mo. An ordinary human might not be able to recognize the original devil clan. It was because the devil world never dispatched its true power to deal with the true martial world. In fact, Only the Great Devil Clan was dispatched from the Devil World to attack the true martial world. This was because the Great Devil Clan had a massive population and was considered as the main force of the devil race. Therefore, many people in the true martial world had the impression of devil race as great devils. They had no idea about the original Devil Clan. It was quite mysterious among the 8 noble clans. Yi Mo naturally confirmed Yi Zaiwen's guess at once. It's the original Devil Clan. Yi Mo said. These original devils are still as annoying as ever. Everyone apart from Yi Shiwen was left dumbstruck. Another 10 or so tyrannical experts of half-step Great Sage Realm arrived after the young expert of the original Devil Clan. Moreover, there wasn't only the original Devil Clan. The Great Devil Clan, and a few other smaller clans were also there. All of these devils were extremely intrepid, without any exception. They were the elites in the same realm. A human expert screamed loudly. He then turned around and flew away. However, he hadn't escaped yet when a big hand suddenly split open the sky. This hand then caught that sage expert high up in the sky, exploded him, and transformed him into a massive blood fog. Chapter 606. A heavy slap on his face. There was a pin-drop silence. Only the miserable scream of that expert who had been running away could be heard at the moment. Humans are very weak. Are all of you like this, scaredy cat? That young leader of the original Devil Clan said somewhat disdainfully. He didn't pay attention to that expert who had been running away. The blood of that expert was dripping from his fingertips. He had attacked and smashed that human expert a moment ago. His tone was mocking. It was full of disdain for humans. The original Devil Clan was considered a very arrogant clan among the Devil Clans. They even looked down upon other Devil Clans. And these humans were like weak sheep in their opinion. Everyone was terrified. These people were considered as elites among the forces of true martial world. However, they became scared when they saw this young expert of original Devil Clan casually grabbing and killing that sage expert. The young expert of original Devil Clan didn't conceal his wild and bloody aura. His strength was unfathomable. He was just a foot away from entering the Great Sage Realm. In fact, he could become a peerless Great Sage expert. Everyone searched through their memories and came to a realization that there was hardly any person below Great Sage Realm in their knowledge who could be a match for him. He must be a Heaven's Pride expert among the devil experts, and the most terrifying one at that. Let's say that everyone was divided into 3 ranks: ordinary ones, elites, and Heaven's Pride experts. Then, these people would be truly terrified whilst determining the level of this young devil expert who was present before their eyes. These experts were elites. There was hardly any match for them among their peers. However, they weren't Heaven's Pride experts. Only a Heaven's Pride expert was truly invincible. Only a Heaven's Pride expert could contend against another Heaven's Pride expert in the same realm. It would be a dead end for ordinary experts if they came across a Heaven's Pride expert. Moreover, these people and that young expert of the original Devil Clan weren't in the same realm. Even the strongest person among these people differed by a level from that young expert of original Devil Clan. This meant that this young leader alone could slaughter all of these human experts. Moreover, there were dozens of senior experts of half-step Great Sage Realm behind him, and each one of them was an elite. Yi Shiwen had a much clearer look than these people. He could spot another Heaven's Pride expert among them. A Heaven's Pride expert of Azura Clan was hidden among those devil experts. His aura looked valiant. It mustn't be much weaker than the aura of that young expert of the original Devil Clan. However, what made Yi Shiwen surprised was the fact that this Heaven's Pride expert of Azura Clan was a subordinate of that young expert of original Devil Clan. This wasn't something an ordinary individual could achieve. Heaven's Pride experts were 1 in 100 million. They were chosen by the heaven. Every person that became a Heaven's Pride expert was proud and arrogant. They were unruly and untamed. Each of them wanted to rise to the peak. So making a Heaven's Pride expert one's subordinate was as difficult as ascending to the heaven. Let's consider the case of Qiao Yuyu and Mu Xingjie. There was a difference of many years between them. Their strength also differed enormously, so it wasn't strange that Qiao Yuyu followed Mu Xingjie. However, The people who could force someone of the same realm to work as a follower were extremely rare. Therefore, it was clearly visible that that young expert of original Devil clan was extremely terrifying. This group of young experts of Devil race had arrived together to block these human experts. They didn't have a dominant position in terms of numbers against these human experts. However, Yishuan still felt that this whole situation was like overkill. After all, even a handful of these devil experts could wipe out all of the human experts gathered here. Yishuan couldn't help but frown as he thought of this. These devil experts were very difficult to deal with. Even Yishuan would have no choice but to escape whilst facing these experts if he didn't summon the Star Colossus avatar. Everyone was trembling with fear. However, nobody dared to turn around and escape. After all, they had already seen what had happened to that expert who had tried to escape just a moment ago. So, what would happen if they also turned around and tried to escape? Your Majesty Motion has made a clever scheme. You've attracted these silly humans by using just a few miniature magic crystal or deposits. An expert of Devil race who was behind his leader original Devil Motion complimented him. The other Devil experts also agreed one after another. They simply looked down on these human experts. They believed that these human experts were just like meat placed on the chopping board. They could kill them whenever they wanted. The complexions of most of the human experts turned a deep shade of red with anger. However, they couldn't do anything since they were too weak. It wasn't that there wasn't any powerful expert among all the human experts of the universe. However, there surely wasn't any such expert present here. They had been thinking of these devil races as their prey before they had arrived here. They had believed that the devil world was their hunting ground where they could run amok. But, who would have imagined that they themselves would become the prey in the end? That they would be considered as meat placed on chopping board, that they could be slaughtered on a whim. Unfortunately, there isn't enough time to attract real human geniuses. Motion said somewhat dejected. These human experts are extremely audacious. They consider our devil world as their hunting ground. It's truly ridiculous. They hardly realize that they are just sheep in front of us. Never mind. We'll find those Heaven's Pride experts of human race and challenge them after we've killed this lot. I'll return to closed-door training and make the breakthrough into Great Sage Realm after I've devoured one such human expert. I'll attain a higher status in my clan after that. Motion's words didn't contain contempt for these experts. On the contrary, he considered them as his bloody meal. He believed that his martial power would skyrocket after he devoured them. The vitalities of these experts were very rich. It was true for any devil that their martial power would rise enormously after they swallowed this vitality. It was just like how the human experts would progress after they absorbed the demon cores of the demon beasts. Nothing was impossible. Fuck, let's fight with them. An expert couldn't help but shout out loud. These devils considered them as a bloody meal. They clearly wouldn't let them off. So, when should they resist them if not now? However, his voice hadn't even faded when a terrifying beam streaked across the vast sky and chopped off his head. His bloody head went out flying. It was a gory scene. However, the devil race naturally couldn't deter those experts at this time. After all, a sword was hanging on these experts' necks no matter whether they extended their heads or retracted them. At worst they would have to fight. A person must die with pride. They mustn't run away from the battlefield. These human experts knew that they could survive only if reinforcements suddenly appeared at this time. Otherwise, they would be completely crushed and wouldn't be able to escape. Their death was almost certain. Therefore, they might as well just fight. Moreover, they didn't know whether the people who would arrive next would be their enemy or friend. They might even be abandoned to be wiped out. Only a few people among all of them might have never come across a desperate situation of life off life, or death even after cultivating till this extent. They obviously didn't want to die. However, they weren't afraid of death either. They wouldn't retreat even if they were cornered. They would only fight to death. Those human experts together launched the most formidable attack after one of the human experts said this. It seemed as if their attack would unleash a destructive power that would destroy the sky itself. Overconfident ants. Motion coldly snorted. Then a big hand stretched out. It covered the entire sky, transformed into a devil energy cloud, and crashed down overwhelmingly. The attack of those experts immediately disappeared after it got grasped by that big hand. Yi Shiwen, this is a good opportunity to grab those 3 magic crystal or deposits. You can use the Star Colossus avatar at least once with that. Yi Mo agitatedly said. The Star Colossus avatar possessed great might. However, it would consume an astronomical amount of primary spirit dawn every time it was brought into use. It would consume more than 500 million primary spirit dawn for fighting just once now that it had made the breakthrough into the intermediate stage of Great Sage Realm. Yi Shiwen didn't dare to use it casually even if he was filthy rich. It was his trump card for saving his life in the devil world. Yi Shiwen didn't hesitate any further as he thought of this. He immediately set out. Suddenly, a fire cloud filled the entire sky. It then transformed into a big hand, and suddenly swept towards those magic crystal, or deposits which were floating in the sky. Yi Zaiwen's speed was extremely fast. He grabbed those magic crystal, or deposits in an instant, and put them inside the heavenly source mirror. Who was that? Mo Tian became angry. He had just defeated the attack of those experts in a manner that made it seem as if a cat was playing with a mouse. However, someone had taken advantage of this distraction, and had snatched away those 3 magic crystal or deposits. He had taken out these magic crystal or deposits in order to lure those human experts. However, he had used them as bait and nothing more. He believed that these ores were still his stuff, and the other people couldn't touch them. However, Yi Shiwen had taken advantage of the chaos, and had snatched away those magic crystal or deposits. Consequently, Mo Tian felt as if someone had thrown a heavy slap on his face. He was born in a noble family. However, it could be said that 300 primary spirit dawn were the majority of his net wealth. So, it would certainly be a huge loss for him if he lost it. Lost it. His gaze locked upon Yi Zaiwen's body almost in an instant. He became angry, and his face turned purple with rage when he saw a grin on Yi Zaiwen's delicate and pretty face. It was obviously a disdainful smile which he had happened to see. Is he ridiculing me? Mo Tian had been looking down on these humans until a moment ago. He considered them as his prey. However, someone among these preys had given him a tight backhanded slap on his face. Moreover, it was a very loud slap. This blow had made him dizzy. He was an arrogant man since he had been rich since childhood. He also possessed high innate talent. So he looked down on everyone. However, someone had given him a tight slap on his face this time. So how could he let it pass? He suddenly roared in anger. Catch him for me. The other devil's gaze fell on Yi Shiwen at this time. They had also found that the magic crystal or deposits had been snatched away by a human. They became angry as a result. It had looked like a flawless plan. It seemed as if this plan had been rehearsed properly in advance. It was as if everything had already been predicted. They couldn't attract the powerful heavens pride experts of the human race as intended. However, their plan hadn't gone in vain since these people also had many experts of half-step Great Sage Realm. The martial power of these devils would have increased enormously after having devoured them. They had made such a perfect plan. However, they had made just a small mistake at this time, and the magic crystal or deposits had been snatched away by someone. However, it didn't matter. It was still a dead end for that person who had taken away the magic crystal or deposits. And the magic crystal or deposits would return to their hands as long as they killed him. Yi Shiwen grinned. It seemed as if he was mocking those devils who considered themselves very clever. After all, these devils had now suffered a double loss after trying to trick the enemy. Yi Shiwen suddenly unfolded the golden devil wings behind his body, transformed into a streamer of light, and flew away. He didn't care about the other human experts. However, he had still attracted the attentions of the most ferocious devils. So those human experts could now escape from the remaining few. Chapter 607. Rushes out of the tight encirclement. Yi Shiwen didn't have a good opinion regarding those disciples of other forces. So he wouldn't mind attacking them if they provoked him. However, Targeting them at this time wouldn't be considered virtuous if the countless years-old enmity between humans and devils was taken into account. The enmity between them was obviously very deep. It was like an ocean of blood. Perhaps some people could have done this. However, Yi Shiwen wasn't in a situation to use such underhanded means at this time. He was certain that the most ferocious devil would soon catch up with him, and the other human experts could escape from the remaining few devils at that time. He also didn't want to use the Star Colossus avatar since he felt that it wouldn't be worth it to do so in such a matter. After all, he would have to use up those 3 magic crystal or deposits which he had obtained with great difficulty. And then, all his hard work would go in vain. He could use the Star Colossus avatar thrice, once at a time. It was his protective talisman in this devil world. Therefore, he didn't wish to use it unless he was in great need. Moreover, he had planned to use the harsh living environment of the devil world to temper himself. Furthermore, it was impossible for these devils to catch up with him. It seemed as if those devil experts had turned into a group of infuriated roosters. They attacked Yi Shiwen one after another with a killing intention. Their dreadful martial arts congealed a huge specter in the sky. That specter then stepped ahead and caught up with Yi Shiwen. Then its foot suddenly smashed down upon Yi Shiwen. It seemed as if the entire world would crumble under this foot. A dreadful power was boiling therein. It seemed as if this attack had been unleashed with an intention to kill Yi Shiwen since there wasn't any sign of holding back in the attack. Yi Shiwen was merely an expert of Sage Great Perfection realm. But they had still launched a full-scale attack on him. So it was clear how furious they were. Their rage could simply burn the sky. Yi Shiwen boldly retaliated. He clenched his hands and formed a pair of fists. His hands then produced 2 big stars in the sky. They looked like a pair of iron hammers. The big stars went across the sky and suddenly pounded upon that big foot. Just like a meteor crashes on Earth. Bang! A dreadful force reverberated. 2 tremendous forces boiled at once. And everything present in the surroundings got transformed into nothingness as a result. Puff! Yi Shiwen felt a strange taste coming from his throat, and spouted a mouthful of blood. There wasn't any suspense left. His whole person had been stepped down to fall from the sky. Yi Shiwen was tyrannical, but he could also only contend against a few experts of intermediate stage of half-step Great Sage realm. However, the majority of these devil experts were in the intermediate stage of half-step Great Sage realm. Moreover, a few experts of late stage of half-step Great Sage realm were also present among them. Even a person as strong as him suddenly spouted mouthful of blood under their joint attack. It was like he was fighting dozens of senior experts who were also stronger than him. Therefore, he couldn't resist even after using the strength of the 7th layer of his tyrant body technique. In fact, he had almost gotten trampled to death. Yi Shiwen had spouted blood. However, other people were left dumbstruck by this. The joint attack of dozens of senior experts of intermediate and late stage of half-step Great Sage realm has failed to kill Yi Shiwen on the spot. He has such a powerful body. Is he some kind of a monster? Those sage experts who had planned to rob magic crystal or deposits from Yi Shiwen earlier had particularly been scared to death at this time. They had thought that Yi Shiwen was cocky, so they had wanted to kill him. However, they now thought that they were lucky that they hadn't chosen to do so. Otherwise, it would have been impossible for them to escape if they had gone ahead with the idea of killing Yi Shiwen. Brothers, let's go. Everyone run away. We'll humiliate these devil brats in the future as long as there will be life left within us. We'll kill these devil brats. Someone reacted, and unwillingly roared. Everyone had been finally mobilized by him. That's right. It wasn't the time to watch Yi Shiwen's performance. It was the time to take advantage of this opportunity and escape when the gazes of the majority of devil experts were fixed on Yi Shiwen. This was the only way. A faint sound of the phoenix came from inside Yi Shiwen's body at this moment. The phoenix regeneration technique was at work. Yi Shiwen hadn't used the phoenix regeneration technique since a long time. However, he had fully grasped the understanding of this technique. His present understanding of this technique couldn't be compared with earlier. The injuries that Yi Shiwen had sustained by the impact just now got healed almost in an instant. Yi Shiwen didn't hesitate any longer. He promptly flew outward to break out of the encirclement. Those devil experts also reacted one after another. They were also dumbstruck. They hadn't anticipated that Yi Shiwen would be able to withstand the impact of that massive foot. They heard a sound of breaking of glass when they were about to stimulate that huge specter once again to attack and kill Yi Shiwen. Crack! Crack! Everyone was left dumbstruck. The fact was that the huge specter that had stepped upon Yi Shiwen a moment ago had been shattered into pieces like a glass. It seemed as if it had suffered a heavy blow by a tremendous force. That tremendous force spread throughout that specter's body. Consequently, its entire body disintegrated and crumbled with a loud scream. How is this possible? Emotion looked on in a daze. He had been trained as a Heaven's Pride expert since childhood. It could be said that he was an experienced and knowledgeable person. What kind of person had he not seen? However, he hadn't expected that someone wouldn't only survive in this situation, but also smash that specter into pieces. He was sure that he couldn't do it if he were to be in Yi Zaiwen's place. Sage Great Perfection level experts might become overlords who could establish sex in the true martial world. However, they were simply nothing in Emotion's opinion. He knew that he would have been screwed if he had come across the joint attack of so many senior devil experts of half-step Great Sage Realm, when he used to be at Sage Great Perfection Realm. It would have been impossible for him to escape because the experts of intermediate stage of half-step Great Sage Realm weren't the only ones involved in this attack. Even the attacks of the experts of the late stage of half-step Great Sage Realm were mixed in. It was simply impossible to be a match for them. However, that was exactly what Yi Shiwen had done. On top of that, he had defeated the specter. What kind of physique does he possess? How can he be so powerful? Emotion was somewhat baffled. Your Majesty, he might be an owner of some special physique among the humans. He might have restored a part of the lineage of ancient humans. Our cultivation will progress even more quickly if we devour a human who has such a special physique. Moreover, we might evolve a physique similar to this special type after we've devoured this human expert. The Heaven's Pride expert of the Azura clan was behind Emotion. He suddenly stepped forward at this time, and said. He was looking at Yi Shiwen with a greedy expression in his eyes. It seemed as if he was looking at an exotic cuisine. There were various kinds of clans among the devil race, and every clan had its own speciality. Humans didn't have so many divisions. However, they used to have various traits in the past. Furthermore, the quantity of such traits wasn't much. So, it could be said that every trait was a precious treasure. Therefore, the martial power of these devil experts would increase sharply if they swallowed even one individual who possessed ancient human traits. It certainly wasn't a myth. Emotion's eyes suddenly lit up. That's right. He had been thinking only about the shock that Yi Shiwen had given him. He hadn't been able to think anything else. However, he wasn't shocked anymore. Instead, he was thinking rationally now. Yi Shiwen had shown such a stunning performance. So he must have some special bloodline in his body. This human could become a huge supplement for him. Catch him, Emotion ordered. He himself took the initiative at this time, and chased after Yi Shiwen. That Heaven's Pride expert of the Azura clan also rushed out. Several devil experts rushed towards Yi Shiwen one after another. Only a few of them had stayed here in order to encircle the other human experts. After all, these human experts were very insignificant in comparison to Yi Shiwen. These experts with ordinary physiques were just like bloody meal for them. They didn't deserve to become even their slaves. There was absolutely no need to give importance to a group of such puny experts. However, there weren't many humans like Yi Shiwen who had such a special physique. Who would let such a person go? Yi Zaiwen's speed was extremely quick. He was about to break out of the encirclement of the devils. However, a senior devil expert of intermediate stage of half-step Great Sage Realm had already arrived in front of Yi Shiwen. He had blocked Yi Zaiwen's way in an attempt to prevent him from escaping. His face was full of scales, and it was brimming with a ruthless and sinister expression. He was looking at Yi Shiwen in a manner that made it seem as if he was looking at a meal. Yi Shiwen had come to know about the devil race's characteristics from Yi Mo. Therefore, he obviously knew what they were thinking. He felt a bit sick after he thought that he was being considered as a bloody meal by these devil experts. "Get out of my way!" Yi Shiwen shouted. He then angrily shot a punch in full swing. Yi Shiwen had attacked in a hurry. However, he hadn't held back. After all, he couldn't afford to be stopped. Otherwise, those devil experts who were coming from behind would catch up with him. His speed was so fast that he could escape even from the hands of a great sage. However, the precondition was that he mustn't get surrounded. Yi Shiwen had enormous skills. However, he wouldn't be able to escape if he got surrounded. He would have no other choice at that time but to take out the Star Colossus avatar. And that would mean that all of his hard work would go in vain. That devil expert of intermediate stage of half-step great sage realm felt the fist wind coming over. It seemed as if a mountain was rolling over to crush him. The fist wind, fist pressure, and fist intention along with the boiling real elemental energy crushed the vacuum and produced a black crack in space. And this crack immediately proliferated in that devil expert's direction. "Go to hell, human!" That devil expert angrily shot a set of devil fist technique. Waves of fierce wind started to wail everywhere. It seemed as if a country of devil gods had been established. People were dying everywhere. It was deadly and frightening spectacle. Bang! It was a shocking scene of doomsday. It seemed as if a big star had suddenly collided with that country of devil gods and destroyed the mountains and rivers. Countless followers of devil gods were evaporated in an instant. They screamed as they perished. The small country of devil gods was collapsing. It was being crushed by Yi Zaiwen's fist technique, inch by inch. That devil expert got frightened when he saw that Yi Zaiwen's fist was quickly approaching him. He roared repeatedly and shot all kinds of martial arts techniques. However, he couldn't stop Yi Zaiwen's advancement. "Get wrecked!" Yi Shiwen shouted as he advanced step by step. The world trembled under his footsteps, and the void broke down. The defenses of that devil expert collapsed under his steps. The devil expert felt as if he was being torn apart by a tremendous force. He then suddenly disintegrated in the sky. Blood splashed out, and the fragments of his bones started to swirl in the air. His death created an opening in the encirclement that had been laid out by the devil experts. Therefore, Yi Shiwen quickly transformed into a streamer of light and flew out. "Damn it! Chase him for me!" The angry roar of the flustered and exasperated Emotion came from behind him. Chapter 608. Freeze for this young lady. Only a short time had passed. But Yi Shiwen had already flown past a great distance along with the dozens of senior devil experts in tow. He had transformed into a streamer of light and had disappeared into the horizon rather quickly. "Brothers, let's fight with these devil bastards and kill them." The remaining experts became pleasantly surprised when they saw that more than half of the devil experts who had planned the ambush had flown away. The ambush had been a dead end for them earlier. However, they had now recovered from a seemingly impossible situation. The devil experts who had stayed here were quite formidable even if they weren't many. However, they had a way out now. It was hard to say how much better their present situation was than earlier. Therefore, there was no reason to hesitate now. The human experts suddenly rose in revolt and started to fight with the group of remaining devil experts. Meanwhile, those devil experts who were chasing Yi Shiwen weren't getting any closer to him. They were flustered and exasperated. However, it was clear that each one of them was an elite. All of them possessed a special agility technique. Therefore, their speed was very fast. They even pulled out trails of afterimages in the sky. However, they still couldn't overtake Yi Zaiwen's speed. Those human experts weren't present here. Therefore, Yi Shiwen didn't hesitate a bit. He immediately stopped suppressing the devil characteristic on the devil wings with his divinities. Consequently, his speed became even faster. The divinities crawled all over his body after he had stopped suppressing the devil characteristic. Consequently, his vision became even more profound. Moreover, his delicate and handsome face suddenly became unusually devilish. It seemed as if the entire devil world had suddenly melted into his body. "Chase him for me. I must kill him brutally." Emotion's face was cold as he said. His complexion had turned exceptionally ugly. Nobody had ever played with him like this. Nobody had thrown such a big slap on his face. He had never faced such humiliation. Therefore, he wouldn't be satisfied until he dismembered Yi Ziwen's body into 10,000 pieces. Yi Shiwen kept flapping the black wings behind his body and crossed 100 miles in an instant. What had mostly made Motian depressed was the fact that he couldn't catch up with Yi Shiwen. He was obviously far stronger than Yi Shiwen. However, he couldn't catch up with him at this time. This was the thing that had made him the most depressed. All kinds of attacks approached Yi Shiwen from behind. However, his devil wings suddenly issued the sound of wind and thunder, and he seemingly transformed into a god of wind and thunder. He intercepted all the attacks. Those attacks couldn't injure him even a bit. Yi Ziwen's 7th layer of tyrant body was still very strong. Therefore, these devil experts couldn't injure him unless they joined hands. However, it was simply impossible for them to collaborate at this time when they were focused entirely on keeping up with him. Moreover, there was a disparity in their respective martial powers. There had been no problem in the beginning when all of them had taken off together. However, they must do their utmost now whilst chasing Yi Shiwen. Otherwise, they would be left behind. And the distance between them and Yi Shiwen would widen even further. Motian was feeling that he had lost face. So, he couldn't let Yi Shiwen go at any cost. He frantically pursued him for 3 days and 3 nights. He didn't want to let Yi Shiwen go. He wanted to exhaust his real elemental energy, and then kill him. He also knew that most of the human experts who had arrived in the devil world couldn't absorb the devil energy present in the air. Only the ones who could transform into devils could do so. Therefore, most of these human experts could only depend upon those spirit dawn for replenishing their real elemental energy. However, he didn't know that Yi Shiwen could directly absorb the devil energy. Therefore, it was useless if he thought that Yi Shiwen would die because of exhaustion of real elemental energy. Yi Shiwen, your purpose of arriving in the devil world will go in vain if it continues like this. Yi Mo said. All of these devil experts were extremely formidable. So, it would be quite normal for them to keep pursuing or fighting like this for 10 years, or even 20 years. However, this wasn't something that Yi Shiwen wanted. Bang! A huge claw suddenly fell down from sky to grab Yi Shiwen. Yi Shiwen dodged the sneak attack of that claw. He then clenched his teeth. I don't want to call out the Star Colossus avatar. But these horrid devil experts will get killed if I do so. Then I'll get some relief from this unceasing chase. Suddenly, a mountain range appeared in front of Yi Shiwen. The devil energy was present in abundance therein. Yi Shiwen flew down headlong into it without any hesitation. He wouldn't mind summoning out the Star Colossus avatar if these devil experts still acted recklessly and came down chasing him. Then the Star Colossus avatar would kill all of them. Those devil experts were about to continue chasing Yi Shiwen. However, they suddenly remembered something when they saw him heading into the mountains, and they stopped in midair as a result. Your Majesty, this place is. The Heaven's Pride expert of the Azura clan stepped forward and said, I've heard that a devil beast that has recently entered the Great Sage Realm stays here. We would come across great danger if we broke into its territory. The relation between the devil race and the devil beasts of the devil world was nasty. It was as if 2 tribal groups had been fighting for survival. Motian shot a glance at that mountain range filled with devil energy with his ice-cold eyes. He hesitated a bit. He wouldn't have minded rushing into this mountain range earlier. However, the king of these mountains had recently made a breakthrough into the Great Sage Realm. So it was a completely different situation now. After all, a great sage didn't have a low position even in the devil world. That man has boldly entered inside. He's courting death. As per the records, a wind and thunder devil snake lives in these mountains. It had started its transformation into a flood dragon 100 years ago, and it has recently completed that transformation and become a devil flood dragon. Moreover, that human expert has gone into its territory, so he is going to become that devil flood dragon's meal. He is doomed now, the genius of the Azura clan said. Motian wasn't willing to give up. However, he knew that the devil beasts wouldn't differentiate between humans and devils. They would treat both as enemies. Station someone here for me. And inform me if that boy doesn't die. Emotion said. He had thought for a while, and had then decided not to stay here any further since it would be useless to do so. He hadn't brought too many of his subordinates this time. After all, he didn't wish to use them to surround an insignificant person of the sage great perfection realm. His target was to kill a few heaven's pride experts of the human race, so that he could become famous in the devil world, and obtain a high-level status in his clan. This was almost the default unwritten rule on both sides. Devils and humans, no expert could get a favorable condition by cultivating in a protected environment. They had to go through unceasing slaughtering. And only those who would survive would ascend to the peak. And as for other people, it was almost set by default that they would end up becoming the corpses that would pave the way for the victors. It was quite cruel. However, this was also the reality. The road to invincibility needed many sacrifices. It was obvious that nobody wanted to become the corpse on someone's journey to invincibility. Everyone considered other people as their stepping stones. Yi Shiwen didn't know what Emotion was thinking. He just noticed that Emotion hadn't come down chasing after him. So he heaved a sigh of relief. He then thought to have a glance on the surrounding environment. These mountains were located inside the devil world. However, they could be regarded as a beautiful green place. He could hear the running water as well as a faint pleasant sound that was coming through it. He saw a giant lake. It had a radius of 50 kilometers or so. It was spread as far as his eye could see. This lake was different from ordinary lakes. The temperature of this lake was unbearably low. One must know that an ordinary variation in the temperature couldn't affect Yi Shiwen, as per his current cultivation. However, this place was so cold that it made him shiver. The strange thing was that the temperature was so low that the lake should have frozen. However, this lake hadn't frozen. It was still in its liquid state. Layers of vapor were unceasingly floating on its surface. Therefore, it looked hazy, and the visibility was low. Yi Shiwen saw a fuzzy petite silhouette inside the lake. It looked captivating. However, he hadn't clearly seen anything when an evil wind swept down from the sky and hit him on his face. Then, a small white hand suddenly shuttled out from the vacuum and swept out towards Yi Shiwen's throat to grab it. Yi Shiwen was startled by this. He had been in a state of high alert since the time he had entered this mountain range. That's because that he didn't think that Emotion had given up the thought of pursuing him, even if he hadn't come down here chasing after him. After all, it had seemed obvious just by looking at Emotion's ashamed and angry appearance that he wouldn't give up unless he got hold of Yi Shiwen. There had been only one possibility. There was something in these mountains that Emotion was afraid of. However, Yi Shiwen had had no choice since it might have taken him several years to get rid of Emotion if he hadn't arrived here. It had seemed from outside that this place was brimming with dreadful devil energy. However, Yi Shiwen couldn't see even the shadow of a beast once he arrived down here. This had naturally made him somewhat suspicious. Yi Shiwen had an urgent feeling of a bad omen in his heart. So he stepped away. Then, the devil wings suddenly unfolded behind his body, and his figure flew away about hundreds of feet in order to avoid being clutched by that small hand. "Freeze for this young lady," a lovable voice sounded. And the power of principles caressed Yi Shiwen's face and swept across. Yi Shiwen felt as if the surrounding space had suddenly been frozen. It had been frozen by the mysterious power of this figure. This was the power of the Great Sage Realm. Yi Shiwen had used the Star Colossus avatar in the past, so he was quite familiar with this power. This is the power of the Great Sage Realm. A perilous situation aroused in his mind. The opponent turned out to be a great sage. It isn't surprising that Emotion didn't dare to come here. So this was the reason. His whole person had frozen in the sky, and he had been rendered incapable of moving. So he was thinking to call the Star Colossus avatar in order to help him break free. However, he then saw an approximately 16 or 17-year-old girl stepping over the void. She quickly arrived in front of him. Her persona was somewhat gloomy, and her countenance was somewhat dull. However, her clothes looked especially vivacious. Her skin was as fair as snow. It was unusually white. Her dark gray eyes were full of curiosity. "She's so cute," She looks just like a cute little girl. However, what Yi Shiwen mostly cared about was the pair of long gray wings that had converged behind this girl's body. Fallen Angel. This thought suddenly emerged in Yi Ziwen's mind. Fallen Angel was the most mysterious clan among the 8 noble clans of the devil race. It was said it wasn't a native clan of the devil world. It had joined the devil world later. They didn't have too many people. However, they had many outstanding geniuses. This small but highly refined clan was a striking contrast to the populous Great Devil clan. The Fallen Angel clan was considered as a low-key clan in the devil world. However, nobody dared to underestimate these angels. In fact, even those other 7 noble clans didn't dare to do so. I hadn't expected that I would see the most mysterious and low-key original devils, as well as the fallen angels soon after arriving in the devil world. Chapter 609. The second layer of devil wings takes form. The fallen angels were different from the arrogant and haughty original devil clan. They had always maintained a kind of low-key magnificence. It could be said that they were noble among nobles. Several people had participated in the devil world competition over the years. Many of them had participated multiple times. However, they had never seen the fallen angels. In fact, many of them had never even heard about them. Yi Shiwen looked absent-minded. However, he quickly regained his focus. He was stunned to see that young girl before his eyes. This girl wasn't very old. In fact, she must be younger than him. However, she was already in the great sage realm. Yi Shiwen was emotionally moved despite being in this hostile situation. So the saying that everyone in the Fallen Angel clan is a genius wasn't false. However, he had thought about this just for a moment. After all, he was still focused on trying to save his life. Moreover, he was also planning to take out the Star Colossus avatar. However, he wasn't sure if even the Star Colossus avatar would be a match for this delicate-looking girl present before him. Which kind of devil are you? That girl of Fallen Angel clan looked at Yi Shiwen somewhat curiously. Then, she became angry the next moment. Why did you peep in when this young lady was taking a bath? The girl opened her eyes wide. Her watery clear eyes looked so clear that one could see the bottom. She was brimming with anger. However, she didn't look terrifying. On the contrary, she looked even cuter. Yi Shiwen almost spouted a mouthful of blood. Peeped in when she was bathing. He obviously hadn't seen anything since the time had been too short. In fact, he had almost gotten clutched to death by this girl in an instant. Moreover, he hadn't arrived here with such intentions. After all, who could have imagined that someone would be taking a bath in this desolate mountain whilst being unafraid of those devil beasts? He then further thought about this matter. Any devil beast who wasn't cautious and dared to approach this young girl would be doomed for sure if one were to take her fighting prowess into account. When did I peep in on you bathing? I haven't seen anything. Yi Shiwen replied whilst feeling quite helpless. That because this young lady had already discovered you. That girl of Fallen Angel clan looked at Yi Shiwen in a smug manner. Why haven't you answered me already? What kind of devil are you? How are you different from those unbearably ugly devils? Unbearably ugly devils? Yi Shiwen was left dumbstruck. It had been quite a long time since he had set foot on the road of martial arts. However, he had never heard someone using terms like beautiful and ugly as a criteria to judge anyone. Let's say that there was a man who possessed tyrannical strength. Then, it was certain that beautiful women would willingly spend money on him instead of demanding it even if that man had missing limbs. After all, attractive looks couldn't act as an advantage. Having formidable strength was the way of the king. Yi Shiwen, think of a way to escape from here. This girl isn't affable. Yi Mo said. He could see a murderous look in the eyes of that girl of the Fallen Angel clan. It seemed as if she was passing judgment on him, even though she was the victim. Yi Shiwen hadn't thought much when the eyes of that girl of Fallen Angel clan shone. She then said, "You don't have wings and scales. You're a human?" Yes. It's no wonder that you don't have devil energy on your body. I've seen pictures of humans in the illustrated handbook. Yi Ziwen's face turned black. What are humans? Are they some endangered animals that one can recognize only through illustrated handbooks? He found it a bit absurd. I hadn't expected that humans would be like this. You're so weak. The girl of the fallen angel clan said with disgust. Yi Shiwen very much wanted to say we humans also have some powerful characters, you know. You'll become my pet. This is the price of peeping on this young lady when she was bathing. I'll take good care of you. And you'll come in handy if someone tries to flaunt their abyss devil wolf pet in front of me again. You'll help me in putting them down. The girl of fallen angel clan brandished her small fist. It seemed as if she was already daydreaming about this flashy scene. Her eyes were shining. They looked like a pair of night pearls. Great. It's decided then. What? Pet? Yi Shiwen felt as if his firm heart would collapse any moment. He was feeling wronged and sullen. He had seen many demon beasts being tamed as demon pets. However, he had never thought that he himself would become a pet of a devil one day. Yi Shiwen, you might as well become her devil pet, and be done with it. This fallen angel has an extraordinary origin. I can feel the grandeur of her noble bloodline on her body. It's not a bad deal. Yemo jokingly spat out these words. Get lost. Yi Shiwen replied angrily. The most important thing is that you can't defeat her even if you don't agree. In fact, you can't defeat her even if you call the Star Colossus Avatar. This girl isn't very old. However, she possesses unfathomable strength. Yemo said. Get lost. You can go and become her pet if you want to. I won't be able to raise my head with dignity in the future if I become someone's devil pet. Yi Shiwen resentfully replied. Impossible. Yi Shiwen clenched his teeth before that girl of fallen angel clan and replied. He would never be very submissive even if he came across a great sage. He would simply escape if he wanted to. However, he hadn't anticipated this situation, and had gotten trapped as a result. I can help you in making a breakthrough into the great sage realm if you promise me. That girl of fallen angel clan said in a tempting manner. However, don't blame me for what happens if you want promise. You've dared to peep on me while I was taking a bath. It's obviously a mortal crime. So, I'll send you to accompany those devil beasts who used to live on these mountains. That girl of fallen angel clan opened her round eyes wide, and said ferociously. She was quite skillful in using the carrot and stick policy. Yi Shiwen became scared. It's no wonder that I haven't heard the voice of any devil beast in these mountains. They must have fallen prey to this girl. I can totally imagine how pitiful it must have been for those devil beasts. Don't even think about it. Yi Shiwen clenched his teeth. He found this too much. It seemed from his appearance that he would rather die than submit. He secretly mobilized his entire real elemental energy, and became ready to wake up the Star Colossus at any time for a life and death fight. How about, you become my pet for 1,000 years? That girl of fallen angel clan couldn't help but relent as she saw Yi Ziwen's determined attitude. Then 800 years. Yi Shiwen still remained unmoved. He looked as if he wasn't afraid of dying. 700 years. 600 years. 100 years. That girl of the fallen angel clan was almost driven mad as she saw Yi Shiwen ignoring her. She wanted to bite him to death. Then let's do it like this. You take me out of the devil world. I'll let you go so long as you take me to your human world. That girl of fallen angel clan opened her big and watery eyes, and looked at Yi Shiwen. It seemed as if she was somewhat pleading. Yi Shiwen became somewhat soft-hearted. He also put away the thought of a life and death fight. He said, all right, great. Let's go and conquer the human world. That girl of fallen angel clan brandished her small hand. She had done so in an imposing manner that was quite similar to that of a generalissimo. However, her facial expression didn't give any vibes of valor whatsoever. She waved her hand, and the spatial power that had frozen Yi Shiwen promptly dispersed. However, Yi Shiwen felt extremely depressed. I've suffered a big loss at the hands of a little girl. Be obedient. That girl of fallen angel clan narrowed her pair of beautiful big eyes. And her eyes quickly transformed into a crescent moon as a result. Just follow this young lady, and you'll enjoy treats. This is for you. It's a reward. That girl of fallen angel clan casually threw a fist-sized devil core towards Yi Shiwen. It was a very small devil core. However, It was faintly emitting the coercion of the great sage level. The fluctuations swept across, swirling in the air. This is a devil core of great sage level? Yi Shiwen was left dumbstruck. Suddenly, that devil core transformed into a black light and flew towards him. He received it in his hand. He felt as if an ink cartridge was emitting magical power that was corroding his palm. The sound of burning of his palm echoed. He promptly used his divinities to wrap up his palm in order to avoid his palm from being corroded. After all, that would have been tragic. The aura of this devil core was slightly impure. It might be possible that that devil beast had barely entered the great sage realm. However, it was clear that it had been an authentic great sage level devil beast. It belongs to a snake which had dared to sneak a peek at this young lattice beauty. The girl of fallen angel clan softly snorted. She didn't say anything further. However, the aftermath was quite obvious. Yi Shiwen used his divine sense and had a peek at the devil core which was in his hand. It is indeed the devil core of a devil flood dragon that had already completed its transformation into a flood dragon. They also possess the dragon's obscene nature. So the devil flood dragons are like subdragons. They want to capture every beautiful woman they see. However, it had unfortunately bumped into an iron wall this time. No, this girl is an iron mountain. Anyone who kicks her will find the bones of their legs shattered. Yi Shiwen, hurry up and absorb it. This devil core is the devil core of a wind and thunder devil flood dragon. It contains the power of wind and thunder within. Your devil wings can thoroughly transform into the second layer of wind and thunder wings after you absorb it. Then, even this fallen angel won't be able to stop you from escaping. Yi Mo said excitedly. Yi Ziwen's devil wings hadn't made a breakthrough since a long time. He had unceasingly tried to deduce and cultivate the second layer of wind and thunder since the time he had touched upon its threshold. However, he hadn't been able to make a big progress since there hadn't been enough wind and thunder power for him to absorb. Therefore, he could only mix the wind and thunder power into the first layer of his devil wings and increase the speed of his devil wings. He couldn't condense the second layer of devil wings. However, he might be able to do so if he absorbed this great sage level devil core. After that, his speed would increase countless times. Even this girl of fallen angel clan wouldn't be able to stop him then. That girl of fallen angel clan was proudly waiting for Yi Ziwen's compliment. She waited a long time but didn't hear Yi Ziwen's compliment. So she became puzzled. But then, she saw that Yi Shiwen had already sat cross-legged on the ground and had begun to absorb the power of wind and thunder from inside the devil core. Consequently, she became depressed and stamped her feet in dejection. She ferociously glanced at Yi Shiwen and then went to the other side whilst sulking. Yi Shiwen didn't know how depressed that girl of fallen angel clan was. After all, he had wholeheartedly immersed himself into absorbing the wind and thunder power. He couldn't afford to lose his concentration now. However, this didn't mean that he wasn't wary of that girl. Yi Mo was secretly keeping watch for him. Furthermore, that girl wouldn't have waited till now if she wanted to kill him. The wind and thunder power had enormous might. But they were also very hard to control. An ordinary person who had gotten hold of even one of the two powers would emerge as an overlord in the same realm. So one could well imagine the tyranny of someone who had mastered both the powers of wind and thunder. That you're tuning in to the Li Mei's Wuxia Whispers YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.